Welcome, everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum tonight. We start with the superintendent reviewing the agenda for us.
So tonight we will start out with the approval of the minutes. We have recognition of Mr. Chris Holden from Normandale Elementary. I'll let them talk more about that a little later on. We have Southview Middle School. We're going to have that award recognized next month. We will have hearings for members of the audience. We have several personnel-related and some budget transfers and some certificates the board will approve and consent. For policies, we have policy update for policy 607, 608, and then a public discussion regarding revised language for policy 601. And then under action, we have general obligations, school building refunding bonds parameters that John Topol report, and then policy updates for 606. That'll be there for the board to approve. And then information, we have some staff recognition and upcoming school board meetings. So that will be it for this meeting.
All right, thank you very much. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the September 16th work session and the September 16th regular meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any changes to the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes from September 16th work session and September 16th regular meeting, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. We move on to recognition. Chris Holden. Yes. That would be great.
Facing you or facing
So Chris, I am not, there we go, I am not one for speaking in French.
Okay.
But can you pronounce that for us, please?
Chevalier dans l'ordre des plans académiques.
Okay, and what does that mean?
That means I'm a knight in the order of the academic palms.
So Chris and, of course, Chris with his staff and with his students have made a great connection with, obviously, the country of France, at many different levels, not to mention the interns that you have working in the program, as well as the connections you have with Edina families in France. And behind that is your leadership and your motivation and your vision for what happens at Normandale every day. So I want to honor you for that. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Next, we have hearings from members of the audience. We do have a time period at every 7 o'clock meeting where we welcome comments from the public. We request that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. If you have comments or criticisms regarding an employee, a member of our community, or anybody else, we would request that you not make those comments in public. In fact, they are prohibited. And instead, if you could bring those to the attention of the superintendent, that would be great. We've got a number of speakers tonight, so if you hear a prior speaker say exactly what you're going to say, perhaps you could shorten what you're going to present to the board. And with that, the other thing is we typically do not have board discussion about the comments or questions that are raised during the 3-minute time period. With that, we will start with Lonnie Skrentner. Welcome. And Lonnie is one of our retired teachers and former school board members.
Well, that saves me some time. Good evening, and thank you for taking public comment. I'm here to speak strongly against the proposed changes to Policy 601. As a former member of this school board, I'm horrified that this policy has apparently been created without any input from administration and teachers, that it is being brought to discussion without having been properly vetted by either the Teaching and Learning or the Policy Committee. As a former gifted resource teacher, I fear you may be creating a nightmare for building administrators, teachers, and the very students you want to serve. At the least, I see the policy as unrealistic in its time frame. If these classes are true honors classes, how are you going to deal with the element of self-selection? Will there be sufficient off-ramps when students decide they want to drop the honors class? Too much use of off-ramps will overload standard sections. When there are limited sections to a class, it is difficult for students to schedule that along with an appropriate level of band, choir, world language, and many other electives. You may be robbing students of one type of choice in order to provide them another choice. The descriptions of these courses need to be ready by January or February for registration. Who's going to do that? The curriculum area that is presently under review has staff members with expectations that there will be at least a small budget operating for curriculum writing and some capital dollars for materials. If you can find teachers willing to write these curriculums in this short time frame, where will the dollars come from to pay them for their time and for the new materials? Since the policy requires that these courses be truly different from the standard level, that means more materials and more work. You added coherence into the definition, which I kind of like. But that makes the development of these courses even more time-consuming, because it means that the teachers across the different curriculum areas really should be working together. The policy requires that teachers of these classes have gifted education certification. In my experience, that is not a common certificate. So will principals be able to staff these classes? As you staff the classes, how many teachers will have more different classes to teach? More preps is more work. So at worst, you may limit student choice, overload teachers with preparations, and actually end up limiting choice and differentiation for students. As I read the policy, many of the parameters are items that we should want for all Edina students. The repetition of the idea that this differentiation cannot take place in standard classrooms, I see as a slap in the face of many of our excellent staff who do truly differentiate. I have provided my full comments to all of the board members to save time. There are many statements and data in the report that will be presented later this evening by Board Member Garby. That report raised more questions in my mind than answers.
Ms. Kretner, could you wrap up, please?
Yes. My suggestion is that you postpone these decisions, that you look at this during regular curriculum review, and in the meantime, direct administration to assess and evaluate the use of differentiation, compacted courses, and the new pathway of embedded honors, which may turn out to be the better solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Gemma Tober. So we are going to have a number of speakers, so I would ask that people not applause at the end of each speaker. Gemma, you're up.
Hello,
Welcome.
my name is Gemma Tober, and this is my mom, Josie Tober. We live in Edina. We both have dyslexia. October is Dyslexia Awareness Month, and we both want to come here to share some information with you all. But before, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my story. I attended Concord Elementary starting in kindergarten and first grade. My mom came to volunteer in a classroom listening to kids read. It was then that she realized something might not be clicking. My mom asked my teacher if she thought I might have dyslexia. My teacher said no. By the end of first grade, it was clear that something wasn't working. I spent the summer before second grade with the best Orton Gillingham tutor, Miss Nelson. Then second grade started and I would be able to get reading help if I scored 40% on my second grade map test. I got 41 and didn't qualify. I also got an official dyslexia diagnosis and still didn't qualify for reading help. I continued to see Miss Nelson through second grade, and I also started to see a therapist because of my anxiety, sadness, and low self-esteem. My low self-esteem was a lot to handle. I love Concord. I love my teachers. I love my best friends, and I miss it all very much. I wish I didn't have to go to a different school to learn how to read, and I look forward to being back with my school family soon. I bet you are saying, well, that sounds like you can read just fine. I worked very hard after school for a year and 2 summers to get this level, and my parents have spent over $15,000 to get me here, which isn't fair to families who can't afford it.
Thank you. Next is Josie Tober. You don't have to go far to get there.
No. So we also wanted to share, since it's Dyslexia Awareness Month, we just wanted to share some fun, cool facts about dyslexia. So dyslexia varies from mild to severe and runs in families. 1 in 5 people have dyslexia, and it is by far the most common learning difference. A study from Yale found that the number of girls and boys who have dyslexia are about the same, and dyslexia occurs in people of all backgrounds. 50% of the people working at NASA have dyslexia. They are sought after because of their problem-solving skills and excellent 3D and spatial awareness, which is great news for Gemma because she wants to be an astronaut when she grows up. Some of the most brilliant minds of our time have been known to have dyslexia: Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Winston Churchill, Benjamin Franklin, Mozart, John Lennon, and our favorite dyslexic, Albert Einstein. Some other dyslexics with successful careers include Whoopi Goldberg, Tom Cruise, Tommy Hilfiger, Jay Leno, Jim Carrey, Jennifer Aniston, Steven Spielberg, and Cher. And I don't want to miss mentioning several Nobel Prize winners, most recently the 2019 Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, Jacques Dubochet. Dyslexics typically have a large spoken vocabulary for their age. They tend to be more curious, creative, and intuitive than average. Dyslexics excel at connecting ideas, thinking outside the box, and 3D thinking. They have a strong ability to see the big picture, and dyslexia is not related to low intelligence. Dyslexics require extra time and effort for their brain to process language information. And despite popular belief, dyslexics do not see letters backwards, and writing letters backwards is something many kids do when they are first learning to write. Research has proven that explicit, systematic phonics can help rewire the dyslexic brain and help dyslexic kids learn to read. And last,
I'd like to tell you all the dyslexic kids out there, you are not dumb. Don't quit on yourself. Every brain learns differently. You are not alone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next is Heather Tietz. And after Heather will be Chris Moquist. Welcome.
A mother of a 6th grader and 9th grader, and I've been coming every month, and we've been talking about AP English data. I don't have my little diagrams this month because they're all in the presentation that Board Member Garvey put together. I am here to say we still do not have that 2008 through 2011 English AP data. I had done a formal data request, Freedom of Information Act from the administration. They said they don't have it. I've done a formal request to the board to ask the administration to ask the College Board, because that is data that is available to us. And if we're going to evaluate any curriculum change, like not having enriched or honors classes in 9th and 10th grade English and using that as our pilot for personalized learning, then I would think that we would want to look at before data and after data, which I've been saying for months. Okay, we just got out of a work session where we talked with a data guy. Talked about how you set up and evaluate data, right? And we were talking about, like, that might be new. I'm going to read a portion of an email I sent to the board on June 10th, 2016, that I have flipped almost every 6 months to the current board members. This was after we'd had the PL consultant in to talk about pilots and setting up pilots for PL, and one of those would be English language. So I said what I didn't get out of last night's meeting was what I was hoping to better understand of how we plan to set up any pilots and how we plan to evaluate the effectiveness of any of these program changes. Usually you bring in a consultant because they have experience in making the change you are investigating. The value the consultant usually brings to the table is a template/structure of what the major decision points are, what the major risks are, and how they could be mitigated, best practices around how the changes could be made, and some guidance on how to evaluate the changes you are making to see if they are right for your environment. When I asked the question last night, what have you learned about how to set up the pilots and how to evaluate their effectiveness, I really didn't get an answer. What I heard last night and what the overriding communications have been around personalized learning from the administration is a focus on engagement. I understand that student engagement is one factor that leads to better academic outcomes, but I don't believe it can or should be the primary driver for and/or evaluation metric of personalized learning. Kids can be engaged by games on the computer. They can be engaged by reading only books that they want to read. They can be engaged by being allowed to work in groups with their friends, even if the material is not academically appropriate for them. None of that ensures or equates to them learning, and especially does not equate to them being challenged academically. Part of planning any big process change is knowing how you will measure if the change is successful. We need to figure out how we will evaluate the effectiveness of any planned program changes. I would put forth that at least one criteria of success must be academic progress. In the past, we could have run a pilot for the academic year and used the fall and spring MAP scores to evaluate the growth of those in the pilot versus those not or the previous year. With the change to only winter map testing, we lose the snapshot of what happened in that academic year to do those kinds of evaluations. So we need to plan in the evaluation criteria and process when planning the pilots and changes. I would ask that you, as members of the board, be asking and providing input on how we will measure the effectiveness of personalized learning. I would ask that at least one criteria be academic progress measured by objective data. I would ask that we make that success criteria and measurements be explicitly set and monitored for all learners, the struggling learners, the high achieving, the historically underrepresented, the economically disadvantaged, etc. So we've been talking about this since 2016. We've been talking about using data to evaluate whether these changes are effective or not. So I'm going to ask one more time. Our primary pilot for personalized learning has been in English 9th and 10th grade, putting all kids in one class with the same content and the same pace. One way we'd look at that is 10th grade MCA scores. I think we know those might not be what we would hope for. The other way is looking at the English AP scores and seeing what has happened to them. You know, the goal of the pilot was to get more kids to take that AP. Did we achieve that? How are we doing in terms of percentage of 3s, 4s, and 5s of kids who take it? Okay? We are not doing our governance job if we're not evaluating that curriculum change and seeing if it was academically advantageous to our students. Thank you.
Thank you. After Chris Moquist is Sue Sullivan. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi. My name is Chris Moquist. We have 2 daughters who are juniors at Edina High School. My family's lived in the district for 25 years, and our children have been part of Edina Public Schools for the past 15 years, beginning when they were 2.5 years old. I'm speaking tonight in support of the Policy 601 proposal as a matter of choice and options. And I would go even further, that I don't believe the proposal goes far enough in adding choice to the curriculum at Edina High School, so that we are truly serving all of our students with where they are and what they need. We live in a world where we're surrounded by choice. The old Burger King slogan of "have it your way" is the norm in nearly every aspect of our life. What do you want? What color? What size? What options? How fast do you want it? That's the world that we live in, except at Edina High School. These are the course catalogs of our neighboring districts, districts into which an ever-increasing number of Edina residents are open enrolling their children. These course catalogs have 3, 4, 5, and even 6 different options for students for virtually every course offered. Here at Edina High School, most courses have 2 levels, a general course and a flavor of an advanced course. So in practice, what we're saying is that the 900 students in my daughter's grade fit into one of just 2 boxes, general or advanced. To me, that just doesn't make any logical sense. Ultimately, putting students into one of 2 boxes just can't be good for them, for their learning, for them to achieve their potential, whatever that potential may be, for their stress levels and mental health that I know we talk about more and more every year, for their ideas about what they want for their lives, for recognizing and celebrating their different abilities, and for applauding their different goals and their different motivations for school. As a very personal example, the current one-size-fits-all approach taken at the high school has not worked for my family. Both of our daughters have truly, genuinely enjoyed science in both the elementary and the middle school level. Unfortunately, neither of them is proficient at grade level math. As they were entering Edina High School as freshmen, we asked what their science options were, and we were told they could register for physics or AP Physics. I expressed my concern that if memory served me, physics takes a fair amount of math. We were told that their options were physics or AP Physics. So for their freshman year, neither of them enrolled in a science course at Edina High School. We were told the exact same thing their sophomore year, 2 options, chemistry or AP Chemistry, 1 box or an advanced box. And they don't fit into either box, and neither do a lot of other kids. So one size fits all at Edina High School, except that it doesn't, and I don't think it has for a long time. So I support the proposal with the idea that it brings choice and options that are desperately needed, and with the hope that that choice and those options will be expanded so that we truly serve all of our students. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next is Sue Sullivan, and after Sue Sullivan is Maria Laux.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Sue Sullivan. I have 3 boys. I have a 6th grader at Southview. I have a 7th grader at Southview and a sophomore at Edina High School. My middle child has significant disabilities. He's medically fragile. He is fed by a feeding tube. He is nonverbal. He has seizures every day. He travels in a wheelchair. There's a lot more, but I'm not going to list it all because I don't want to waste my 3 minutes on that. I have never been to a school board meeting before, but I am the former chair of the Special Education Advisory Council, and I am the Southview representative this year. So what brings me to this school board meeting is the budget cuts to special education that have been going on now for 3 years, and there's probably been more, but this is what I've been made aware of. And I have some facts and figures that I just wanted to get on record that weren't allowed in the district email that was sent out to all of the special education parents that was, I wrote an email that was supposed to send out to rally the troops to get to the strategic plan, because a lot of us special education parents don't have time to come here. I don't have time to come here, but I need to be here because our budget just continues to get decimated. The last 4 years, the population of special education has grown 18%. The special education budget has undergone cutbacks of $300,000 to $400,000 the past 3 years. These reductions have impacted staffing in the areas of paraprofessional supports. We lost our assistive technology support for my son who is nonverbal is essential. There's no other way he can communicate. And that was crushing. We have also lost an autism and developmental disabilities specialist, a speech coordinator, a speech assessor, the 504 coordinator, and the assistant director of special services her position has been cut in half, which leads to an overwhelming workload for both Corey and Jeff, although he probably wouldn't admit it. And then also the intervention specialist coordinator at the elementary level has been lost as well. So I'm just here to figure out when it's going to end, when other programs are going to share the load. I know that the gifted and talented program has not been cut. At least last year, there was no cuts to it, and they have a full-time person. I know that the state mandates that the school provide all of the supports that are listed in all of the IEPs, but the state does not fund those mandates. So the general budget has to get caught up in that. So that's our conundrum. And it feels a little bit like Lord of the Flies. I have 2 other boys that are in the gifted and talented program, and I would gladly give all of their services away to get back everything in the special ed budgets, because these kids need us more than you know. And I know that the GT services are very important as well, but my son can't communicate now because we don't have a specialist. And the teachers are trying to get creative. They're looking online at YouTube videos and buying devices themselves out of their own pockets. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you. After Maria Laux will be Lisa O'Brien.
My name is Maria Laux. I'm an Edina resident with 3 children in Edina Public Schools. I wanted to thank School Board Member Muir Garby for taking the time to write Honoring Student Differences, the document that he submitted to the board as part of the discussion around modifying the language of Policy 601. Amir's paper shows in detail that the choice of honors and enriched courses in secondary grades is popular and appreciated. This is not a surprise because the student achievement numbers in Edina are not normal from a statistical standpoint. Statistically speaking, we have a skewed distribution. I want to quote some numbers from the 2018 GT study. 36% of 5th graders in Edina Public Schools score at the 90th percentile in MAP math tests. 59% score above the 80th percentile. 23% of 5th graders score above the 90th percentile in MAP reading tests. 49% score above the 80th percentile. I've been attending board meetings and work sessions where speakers state that the district does too much for a small group of students that are already successful. The numbers above, provided by the district's own teaching and learning department, make it clear that the amount of students that are well above grade level is significant. This is not about creating small, uneconomic classes for a few individuals. Furthermore, how is providing high-quality instruction at different levels benefiting one student at the expense of another? How is meeting the needs of all learners not a good thing? Amir's paper also stresses the need for honors classes that should be high quality and coherent. I attended a work session a few months ago where a senior administration official stated that the only difference between enriched classes and regular classes is the students sitting in the seats. I took this statement to mean that there is no content difference between enriched and regular classes. In several previous work sessions, there were discussions about eliminating enriched courses in middle school because they are not different from regular courses. If enriched courses are not meeting the needs of advanced learners, Edina Public Schools should create rigorous honors courses where differences in class curriculum and expectations are transparently available for students and families. Some students will choose the challenge of a harder class, even if it means more work and potentially a lower grade. Other students will choose a class that has less challenges because they have other commitments that are a priority. Some students will find themselves in classes that are a bad fit and have to change. What's wrong with that? I attended the August school board session where there was a discussion around the use of embedded honors in pre-AP 10. As Amir's document points out, the data indicated that many students did not meet their full potential under the embedded honors model. In pre-AP 10, less than 5% of the 10th grade students demonstrated honors level work. In contrast, approximately 20% of Edina juniors earn a 3, 4, or 5 in the AP English exam, showing a mastery of content above grade level. As Amir points out, these discussions are not new. He documents how this discussion has been ongoing since 2012. The paper he wrote uses objective data to support its conclusion. I hope that board members are data-driven in their decision-making and modify Policy 601 to better meet the needs of all Edina students. Thank you.
Thank you. After Lisa O'Brien will be Erica Ostroms. Right, Lisa's also a former board member?
Thank
Not
you.
a teacher, though?
Not a teacher, no, but I do have letters after my name. I'm Lisa O'Brien. I have 3 children. One's a graduate from EHS in 2018. I have a high schooler and a middle schooler. I am here because of hope. Our children came to Edina Public Schools, engaged, curious learners, loving school. And we were thrilled when we first started kindergarten and first grade. In second grade, my curious, engaged daughter became increasingly sad, teary, and despondent. She was decidedly not fine. At parent-teacher conferences, we learned that after acknowledging that our daughter had above average skills and above grade level skills, that the teacher told us that she did not have time to teach our child. Our family is not alone. Why did I stay? My hope was restored in third grade when my child received targeted instruction in math and reading at her level with a teacher who did not only have the time for my child and others like her, but had encouraged and supported and fostered her. So we stayed. In middle school, my child went to classes and would raise her hand with questions and get responses that we might get to that question. I'll talk to you later about it. That happened continuously. Another obstacle and diminishing her curiosity. Why did we stay? Our hope was restored. We had leveled classes in reading in 6th grade, in 1 class in 7th grade, 1 class in 8th grade. This was when the 9th grade was at the middle school. She had an opportunity to take AP Government, which was a class with high standards, high rigor. An amazing teacher brought discussion home every day. So we stayed. In high school, language arts 9 and 10, we began a credit by assessment process in March the previous year before 10th grade. We were met with a 16, and I mean 16-hour exam, an obstacle after obstacle, legal letter after legal letter, back and forth for 7 months before finally our daughter was allowed to take APUL. Almost a month into September, she passed with an A and got at least, I think, a 4 on that test, by the way. When we met with that curriculum review team at the high school, my child left saying, "It feels like they hate us." Why did we stay? My hope was restored when I found an English class for my daughter that met her needs. And the policy was changed for the credit by assessment that no test would be over 4 hours, similar to an AP test. I have hope there. I am also not alone because, as Sue Sullivan mentioned, the struggles that we had with the system were met every year by people who have kids with special needs, with kids with 504 plans. Every year, they have to say the same thing over and over again and getting a no from the system. I am hopeful today because I've been working on this process and beating my head against this system since 2007. And this is the very first time that there is traction for something to move the system. I am hopeful today because for every negative experience, for every spurious obstacle that was placed in the path, with every no that the system put against us, we had an amazing, talented teacher who saw that in my kid, and I know they saw it in others across the board. I appreciate them so much. I'm here to support them. I am here to say move Policy 601 forward to meet all kids' needs. Other districts do this. We can do it too. And do not let the perfect get in the way of the good for all our students. Thank you.
Thank you. After Erica Astroms will be Angela O'Neill. Welcome.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Erica Ostroms. I'm a Edina resident. I have 3 children. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Amir, for your report that you did. I think you did a very thorough and good job. Thank you for your efforts on that. I really do appreciate that. I actually came here today to give an analogy in a little bit different setting. And it's regarding differentiation and personalized learning. I've been a 20-year certified ski instructor. I'm certified both in Europe and in the United States. And in PSIA, or Professional Ski Instructors of America, there are 9 different levels, depending on what your ski level is, and you can move up those levels based on certain metrics. As a professional ski instructor, I've had situations where I've had, on a macro level, a heterogeneous group of skiers. And it's very frustrating as an instructor, and it's very frustrating even more for the students that are in the class. And here's why. You end up with a class, and let's say you've got some kids who've never been on skis before. I call them never-evers. And then you have a whole bunch of kids in the middle who are intermediate skiers, and, they're perfectly fine. They can kind of go up and down the hill on their own, and they're doing their thing. And then you've got a few kids that might be racers. They ski every day. They're kind of going on a track. Maybe they want to go on and do something with it. Anyway, when you get a class like that, you have to go on the bunny hill. There's nowhere else you can go because it's unsafe for those never-ever skiers to be anywhere else but the bunny hill. So here's what it's like for those kids. The intermediate kids and the racer kids, when they're on the bunny hill, they're bored. They don't have anything to do. So what I do with the racer kids is I'll say, take off your skis and go run up and down the bunny hill and get more in shape. But that has not improved their skiing. All it's done is making them a little bit stronger. The middle level skiers, I might say, okay, you go up and go do some free skiing for a while because you're fine, you're at grade level, while then I can work with the never-evers to get them to at least to a point where they can get on the hill and get up the mountain, okay, so where we can actually start instruction. So my point with this is that it's very different as a ski instructor to differentiate when you've got a heterogeneous situation. You can't, yes, you have to differentiate, but you're differentiating to the standard of the bunny hill. That's what I'm trying to get at. And so with that said, in a normal way that ski instructing is organized is the kids are differentiated by, first of all, by what level that they're into the different classrooms or the different ski levels. So then when I go and take a class, if I've got never-evers, I can teach all those kids and get them moved up very, very, very quickly because I'm not having to worry about all these other kids. If I've got a group of intermediate kids, I can move that group up and I can do a ton of individualized attention, personalized learning, and I'm micro-differentiating as opposed to macro-differentiating. And same thing with racers. Yeah, they're going to pass the test, lickety-split, no problem. They're going to be able to blast ahead of anybody that's there because they're talented in that area. But even a racer can get better and better and better. So my point is that if you differentiate by level and you do the personalized learning with micro differentiation and micro personalized learning within that unit, then you can move every group up. Everybody goes better, gets up, and keeps moving up the scale. So I just want to say, I know it's an analogy, but I wanted to talk about it this way because it kind of takes it out of the box of the academic.
Could you
and I'll
wrap
be
it up,
done.
please?
Yep. And I just want to say that I am in support of Policy 601 and its changes and would appreciate that you vote likewise. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Angela O'Neill. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Angela O'Neill, and my husband and I live in Edina with our 2 daughters who are 8 and 5. We are a typical Edina family with 2 well-educated parents with master's degrees who moved to Edina intentionally for the schools. Our oldest daughter is in 3rd grade this year at Concord, and our youngest daughter is in kindergarten. What may seem unusual to you is that my oldest daughter has been a struggling reader. She was identified in kindergarten as a student who needed additional practice with letter-sound correspondence. Despite extra help from her kindergarten teacher in the classroom, she continued to struggle and was significantly behind her peers. In 1st grade, when most students took off reading, my daughter continued to struggle with sounding out basic words and had a very difficult time with sight words and spelling words. This seemed unusual since she had been read to since birth and was surrounded by books and a loving family to support her educational journey. What I didn't realize, and no teacher explained to me, is that there is a very common condition called dyslexia. That is defined as an unexpected difficulty in learning to read in an individual who has normal to above normal intelligence level, and it affects approximately 20% of the population. That's 1 in 5. People with dyslexia have trouble matching the letters they see on the page with the sounds those letters and combination of letters make. Brain research has confirmed that the brains of dyslexic people are wired differently, which causes the struggle in reading, but provides superior capabilities in other areas. After my daughter finished 1st grade, I knew we really needed to work hard over the summer to make some significant progress in my daughter's reading ability. I hired an Orton Gillingham tutor to work with my daughter twice a week. Once we started the Orton Gillingham tutoring, it was amazing. It was like light bulbs were being turned on for my daughter, and the light was shining exactly where the breakdown was occurring. Orton Gillingham instruction approach is an explicit multisensory structured program that has been around since the 1930s. An example of this type of program is Sunday, which was introduced into the Edina School District 3 years ago with a reading specialist. The district has also moved forward with the Sunday Essentials classroom program in kindergarten and 1st grade classrooms this year, which has been wonderful. Anyway, back to my daughter. It was the Orton Gillingham tutor who could clearly see that the reading struggles my daughter was experiencing was more than a developmental delay, which is what her teachers suggested. The Orton Gillingham tutor recommended we have an assessment to determine a specific diagnosis to better target her intervention. So we did, and we found out she was dyslexic. Dyslexia is a language-based learning disability. Kids with dyslexia require instruction in language and multisensory, structured, sequential, systematic way. This is an Orton Gillingham Sunday method. For Dyslexia Month, I wanted to share my daughter's story to highlight the struggles that many families are encountering in our district. My daughter was lucky that we connected with an Orton Gillingham tutor early and that we were able to start an effective reading instruction program by the end of 1st grade. Unfortunately, that means she lost 2 years during a critical period in reading development and means she is still working on closing the reading gap between herself and her peers. The good news is that we know how to teach these kids and that the addition of the Sunday Essentials in our K-1 classrooms should make a significant improvement in these students' journey. But we can't stop at 1st grade. We need to continue to implement the Sunday Essentials Orton Gillingham-based curriculum into grades 3 through 5 as well. We also need to follow the recommendations of the Minnesota Board of Education and implement the Letters Training Program. Letters Training is a robust continuing education program that is recommended for all K-5 teachers and all reading intervention and special education teachers. The knowledge teachers will gain from this program will significantly improve the instruction and knowledge base so that they can more effectively address reading struggles in the classroom, and so they too can be experts in our schools in providing the most effective instruction possible to all of our students.
Ms. O'Neill, could you wrap up, please?
Yep. We know from science that all kids will be better readers and spellers when they are taught using science-based reading strategies taught in the Letters program. I'm so happy with the work that the district is doing, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. That completes hearing from members of the audience. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and speaking. We do have one recognition of staff. We have a recognition of Dan Hutchinson, who is the general manager for Chartwells. We received an email that says, "I'd like to share my deep appreciation for Dan Hutchinson, our food service general manager from Chartwells. Dan is a food planning, preparation, and customer service superstar." Thank you, Dan. Next, we have the consent agenda. Is there anything that anyone wants removed from the consent agenda?
Yes.
Sure.
Could we remove item
F?
F, thank you, the paraprofessional super sub?
Okay.
Thank you.
So item F is removed. It will move currently to an action item at the end of
Thank you.
consent. So anything else to remove? If not, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved?
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, we do have the paraprofessional super sub action item. I think that, Sarah, you wanted to bring a motion to table that till next month?
We do have Ryan and Noella who come up here and talk about the super sub for an approval, as opposed to tabling it. That's
Right.
right with you, Chair?
Okay.
Procedurally, we hadn't heard about it in HR, so I thought we should at least move it to an action item rather than a consent item. So I thought if we could just get a quick explanation. Thank you.
Right. So then
Ryan and Noella, I'm sorry.
So I still need a motion to approve the paraprofessional super sub.
So moved.
All right. Now we're ready. Thank you.
I'm just going to let Ryan take over C6 for
Thank you. So I met with Noella as we've had a need at Southview this year. We have 21 paraprofessionals at Southview this year, and we've had a really hard time when they are absent getting those positions filled. So we pulled up some data, and when we put out a call for the subsystem, we only get a sub 40% of the time if a paraprofessional is out of the building. And many times we're able to successfully, we know some super subs that are often willing to come to Southview and work. When we do that, that's helpful for us because when it actually goes out to the subsystem, 53% of the time we are unfilled. So our buildings have a premier or a super sub at the teacher level, and that helps in those instances when teachers are out of the building and unable to get a sub in the system. The super subs fill those classes, and we can continue on with our day. With our paraprofessional staffing, we don't have that, which means that many mornings when we have paraprofessionals that are unfilled, we are left scrambling and shifting staff around to try to meet the needs of students. And that puts us in a very difficult position with some of our students that have the highest level of need. So our hope in having a paraprofessional super sub is that our building needs are met every day, and we don't have to start the day stressed out, scrambling around, trying to shuffle to make ends meet for all of our students.
Thank you.
Any questions? All those in favor of approving the paraprofessional super sub, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, we move to discussion. The first is policy updates 607 and 608. Amir?
Great. Yeah, these were discussed together with Jeff Jorgensen at our committee meeting, talking about changes in the law, or really just recognition of some of the laws that also apply added here. There are significant updates to the text, but we've been told a lot of it is trying to document some of what's already legally binding and also to better explain some of the processes we already have. The policy 607 is for special accommodations and services for students with special needs, section 504. And then policy 608 is instructional services, special education. One of the big acknowledgments is the impact that the Disabilities Educational Improvement Act of 2004 has on how we do business, which wasn't previously documented. And also some definitions that specify who this policy applies to specifically. So it's worth noting all of the additional text that's in there to help clarify some of those points. We also clarified who the coordinator is, whether it be the director or the director's designee, and what work that coordinator will do. And just for reference, some of the conversation there had to do with whether 504s, when you do a review, do they have an overarching trajectory? For example, are you trying to have an eye towards easing off supports? Some parents want their children more ready for the next level, where supports would suddenly end after graduation, or not. And then also a question of should we be offering 504 accommodations for students who may not show signs of, well, say signs of needing them in the classroom, but we get reports from families that they're holding it together during the school day, but there are meltdowns at home. And what can we do as a system to try to better respond to the whole student and bring some of those accommodations into their school day with a perspective on a student's day and life outside of school as well. We did ask if there's anything we can do to respond to concerns about fidelity with regard to accommodations and modifications, which isn't a policy change, but it's sort of the bigger question of how are we serving students. And we heard all the things that actually he said in different forums as well about some of the great work that's ongoing, some of the great work that's new this year. For example, a bigger emphasis during professional development on what it means to respond to some of the accommodations or the modifications and how teachers can be supportive. And really our district office and the systems level support provided to teachers to best meet those needs and what that looks like this year. Kind of a corrective action planning model, I think, was the phrase you used. And getting more support pushed out to where teachers are, as well as more coordination between special education providers and the mainstream teachers. So in all, it was a good conversation. It was really just a check-in point because you've had these conversations with various leaders in the district previously, and there are more coming up. But this was the policy check-in on that type of work.
So with both of these, is the language based in statute and to make it align with actual state statute? And then my second question is, does the language make sure that we are accommodating the needs of a 504 and that they're not just getting, stuck in a drawer and we're not paying attention to them? So I'm just wondering how the language lines up for the statute issue, but then also the enforcement issue of actually making the accommodations.
Yeah, so I can answer that question. So the language was obviously brought in alignment with statute. It was already in alignment with statute. What we did was actually add additional definitions and clarifications that made it much more understandable from the public's perspective in terms of both how to recognize if your student is an eligible student under 504, and also talks about how to access those services. So it's giving better definitions. It gives us solid definition, especially under 608 when we talk about special education and specialized instruction. We really define what that instruction looks like. How is it specialized? And then we also, again, define the populations that are eligible to receive that service. There's many things that are not in policy, which is about implementation of the policy itself, that are more in alignment with the 504 manual or with the special education handbook.
I guess the reason I was asking is particularly like on the 504s, how does a parent and their student then, what steps do they have to go through if accommodations aren't being made? Whereas, not that doesn't happen to parents with IEPs as well, but I was curious if we were going to have any language that would help parents through that process. But it sounds like possibly in the handbook, we have some more of that as well.
Yes, the handbook is much more deliberate in terms of procedural elements. So then this was a major change from our last revision back in 2016, where we had a lot of the procedural elements right in the policy. Now they're in the 504 manual, and the 504 manual is much easier to revise because it's not part of policy. So procedurally, we're able to make accommodations and make those changes as necessary.
Any other question on those policies? All right. So we next move on to discussion of revised policy 601. Amir, you're on lead again.
Great. Yeah, I want to start by going down, we did this at a work session, but going down policy 601, some of the changes to clarify what's in there and what's not in there, because I've heard I've heard some concern or some excitement about things that are not in there, and some concern about things that are lacking that are in there, so take a minute to run it down it. There is a definitional addition about the word coherent. We had some definitions in there. What do we mean when we say academic standards? What do we mean when we say curriculum? What do we mean when we say educational competencies? And to that list, a fourth one now, coherent, meaning well-organized and purposefully designed to facilitate learning and free of academic gaps and needless repetitions. And the third area is aligned across lessons, courses, subject areas, and grade levels, which is something the district has endeavored to do at all levels, at all times, to try to have coherent and comprehensive educational programs. I mean, that's kind of our baseline. So I wouldn't say that this is something that's new and it's impossible and it rocks the district. I think this is actually documenting something we already value. Just like some of those other definitions, try to clarify what we mean when we use words that have more of a technical meaning than might be appreciated, especially if they're words that are otherwise used in conversation. All right, scrolling down, there are some additions. Let's see, there's a big reference to various aspects of a great program that are listed here that actually were created by the district office with regard to overall K-12 talent development pathways and what great classes should look like. And so, frankly, robbing some of those descriptions just to clarify that we're not asking for a class to be created that doesn't involve elements of those. So nothing would likely be able to contain every element for a given class or subject. Or at least maybe I'm setting a low bar, maybe somebody can do it. But that's a lot to ask. Elements of enrichment with the various definitions and explanations of what enrichment is, advanced learning, accelerated learning, real-world application. So really just kind of nodding along to some of those elements that are valued in a high-quality class, any class which we would design with quality in mind. All right, going to the elementary schools. The elementary schools really are not affected by this policy, with one small exception. It's what it's doing, though, is documenting some of the assurances we've had about how we do education with regard to advanced academics. There's been concern going back years that something was always on the verge of being ended. Are you going to fold the program back in? Have you decided that advanced academics is not the way we're going to do business? In fact, a few years ago, that concern came to a head, and we first got the assurance that, no, that's not on the horizon now, and we received that assurance again this year. You know, it's hard to know what a horizon is. At 2 years, I think it's definitely not on the horizon in 2 years. But in the future, you'd, of course, want to do what you think makes the most sense for students. But by codifying that assurance here, it makes any sort of change to it have to go through a board, have to get a vote for an amendment. All right. The one exception I mentioned is the way we do advanced academics is with the pull-out instructors who are qualified. And I want to clarify, it wasn't a particular qualification that's mentioned, but just the idea that there's some sense of qualification, which isn't defined here. It frankly would be up to the educational leaders what they think is worth somebody holding that position. What do you look for when you hire somebody? What do you look for when you keep them? So just a recognition that there's some sort of qualification. But there was a school a couple years ago that said we'd rather not be doing pullouts, and they had some reasons due to space, and so that would be a school that's affected with regard to whether or not advanced academics return to a pullout there or not. That would be a school that's affected by this policy. All right, the secondary schools, there was a reference to the advanced pathways in math. We currently have math classes that are tailored to what a child needs, more so than any other subject, and that's just true nationally. It's how math is typically taught. You get algebra in the grade where you're ready for algebra, and it might be earlier than some, it might be earlier than we did 10 years ago, but now it's the norm, or it might be after you've mastered some of the underlying topics. That's currently how we do it. There has been some concern or talk of, is there even a hint of somebody saying, you know what, we can just put 7th graders together and somehow have some learning algebra, some learning geometry, whatever the deal is, in the same room, with the value being that the 7th graders are a social cohort and they need to stay together. That is not something that's been explicitly proposed in our districts, and so having it codified here that these classes are separate is really just, again, documenting the way we do it, the way we think it's working, the assurances that it's not something that's on the change on the horizon. All right, and we start going towards the middle school honors classes. So that is a new word, honors class. Typically use enriched in this district, and that's where the inconsistencies are. When do you get an enriched class for a subject? For example, social studies, it's only 7th grade, not 6th, not 8th. The word honors here may be throwing people off because it's not to say that there's going to be an additional class in addition to the enriched. It's really referring to the current procedure, which is let students opt in at certain times. So that enriched class is what we're talking about. Now, changing sort of the name, and I guess I'm going to take a pause here to editorialize. It's sort of, instead of reading down just directly, it gets at this question of, is it really different? Is there a different pace? Is there a different curriculum? Frankly, I'm hearing mixed messages. I have some parents say the middle schools in Edina are awesome. If you need enriched, they have enriched, and it fits your need. And I have other parents saying that they keep hearing a teacher or a principal say, why do we even have these classes? They're not that different. The difference is who registers for them. They might make you do something extra, maybe a 4th paper at a certain level instead of a 3rd. And that's an example. But I'm hearing conflicting messages about, are they that different? Some are adamant that something like this isn't necessary because they are radically different, and others say we don't even need enriched classes because they're not that different, which is something we've heard tonight. And so trying to throw out a word that doesn't seem to carry the meaning that maybe it should. And so honors is looking particularly at something that is very difficult for a teacher to differentiate, and that is pace. And also what curriculum you're offering. Very difficult to differentiate the curriculum you're offering. So those are the two words that, in my mind, go to this. Now, that might not be something that's radically different. Say, for example, the ones that are offered. 7th grade social studies may not be radically different in the fall. But as you have an eye towards continuous improvement, the lens for where should we be going, how do we offer this course, what should be improved over the next year, would be more towards a distinction in curriculum and pace that's appropriate for the students who need that sort of an extra challenge. It would not be appropriate generally, even for students who are competent, who are proficient at grade level, and who are on a college-bound track and who need challenge and growth. Okay, so that's why we have the reference to the name honors there. It also does say self-identify, which means students would select with input from their families a course at registration, as we currently have. And those are for the language arts, science, and social studies courses, which are the core minus math, which we've already talked about. All right, and then you get to the high school. High school does have a lot of choice, almost everywhere. And to a point that was brought up tonight, it is largely 2 options. It is, say, an enriched or the standard in some sciences, or it's the standard versus AP, especially in social studies, in the later language arts years. This isn't trying to add more to that. At this point, this is saying that we have typically 2 choices, but not everywhere. A couple of places in particular, the 9th and 10th grade language arts, where we'd be asking for that course to be created. It's one of the 8 courses that would be created. And that was the missing enriched for the core classes in middle school, and then those 2 in the high school. That brings it up to 7. The 8th is pre-calculus, which we used to have as a district. And pre-calculus is an interesting thing because it leads, for the first time in a long time in some of these math curriculum, to a very different level of challenge directly. Do you want calculus AB or calculus BC? And also you get a bigger, say, spread of ages and, say, aptitudes or interest in math, because some students are taking pre-calculus quite young and they've always gotten it quick, whereas others, it might be their culminating high school math class. It might be that that's their push. It's their senior year, 4th year of math class. You don't need it to graduate, but you should have growth. You should have a passion for these types of challenges, and also you want to show a college that you're interested in a challenging senior year. So that's a very different set of needs in a math class, which we've kind of valued. The math we have so far is already being differentiated enough in course options, but pre-calculus, bringing that back, is the exception. Many other courses that are listed there we already have. The 9th grade year physics has 2 options, chemistry has 2 options, biology. The language ones that are listed already have something called enriched, whereas the ones that are not listed don't. So we're not actually trying to create every new course. It's only 8 that are not currently listed, and those are the core ones and the pre-calc. Some of them aren't even heavily utilized. The sociology one didn't run. Great. Let students register for what fits for them. And the very last point was a nod to the world language needs, that we shouldn't have students forced into, say, Spanish 1 just because they hadn't yet accomplished that class without regard to their proficiency. I mean, it's rather common sense, but it's a conversation we've had before, a question of how do you know a student's proficiency and how do you offer that need. And so it's not exactly a class proposal, but it's more of a placement issue that's put here, all of them with regard to those types of needs. That's not everything there's to say. In fact, most of you have other things that are worth saying, and I think a lot of the points that have been brought up by people, whether they favor it or don't favor it, are valid and reasonable and deserve to be heard. So with that, I think I'll just give some other people a chance to express some of their thinking on this.
Yeah. Before we start getting too far into the discussion on this, I just wanted to personally state to my fellow board members and the public how much I strenuously object to discussing this policy tonight. I firmly believe if we're going to have a discussion about how to best educate our gifted and advanced learners, first of all, this cannot be done in a bubble without a broader discussion about how to utilize district resources appropriate to meet all learner needs. Second, we should not be having the discussion without educators and administrators and subject matters, not alone as a board. Third, we should have done research on this matter. We should have all relevant data available, and we should know the cost of implementing such a policy. Anything other than this, I feel, is an abdication of our duties as a school board member. Furthermore, by discussing this policy in isolation without even having the courtesy to ask our educators and administrators to be part of this discussion or ask their input sends the message to all of our educators and administrators that our board is dismissive of their opinions and their professional advice and expertise is not relevant or valued in our district. I'm especially frustrated because of the convoluted process that has been undertaken, as opposed to taking a strategic look at how to best meet all learner needs as part of our strategic plan, including those that are advanced and gifted. We are looking at how to force through a singular tactic. This is inefficient and it's fiscally irresponsible. And the policy put forth is very simplistic and myopic on how to educate advanced learners. And I think we owe all our learners, but especially our advanced and gifted learners we're trying to target in this policy, more effort than what is being put in this policy. That being said, since we're discussing this prematurely with no relevant information, I have multiple questions about the policy construct, the written language, the policy implementation, data analysis, strategic objectives, financials, and best practices around educating gifted and advanced learners.
I didn't know if you were going to launch into your questions, but so before you do so, I will note that I agree with the sentiments that Erica has expressed. I think that the idea of having this discussion without having gotten input from educators does not make sense to me. Also, it seems to me that at the last work session, what we said was here are a series of questions that the committee was supposed to respond to, and I don't see answers to those questions. We talked about putting together a panel. The board appeared to agree on putting together a panel. But yet we're good. And the idea of the panel is to actually have information from which we could base a decision, but yet here we're having a discussion without a panel and without waiting for a panel. And I do have questions also based upon the substance of what you're proposing, but I just wanted to note my concurrence. Do you want to go into any of your questions, Erica? Or Amir, did you want to respond?
I'll respond to a little bit of that.
Sure.
No, I think it's a misunderstanding to say that this is a discussion that's premature. In fact, it's a discussion that's almost a decade old. When we first started to say, let's start collapsing these enriched classes, and we actually have lost 3 of them without a report on how that's gone, without metrics showing us, what do you think of this? Should it expand? In fact, it almost expanded to collapsing other things, folding back in advanced academics, which may or may not even be a thing. It may just be that you say we need to just end that particular program, and the language is folding in. There are other programs that have gotten support from this board, such as embedded honors, that I would say didn't meet a single one of your criteria and weren't met with 50 questions and a hesitation. In fact, there's still a push now to give embedded honors a 3 to 5 year pilot period so you can really collect some data. But let's just look at that a minute. That's an idea that came up out of nowhere as a stopgap measure for this very idea. Embedded honors in the 10th grade language arts was not a thing. Having 2 different courses was the idea. At the time we were rewriting, overhauling that course. And we were told,
And
you
it
know,
was
you can't
thrown
overhaul.
out by a board member and accepted as a whole without
But
research
it's
and all of
important to
the other
note that
questions.
we were asking for 2 different levels and told, you know, you can't redesign a course and have the honors version or enriched version in the same year. Go ahead and wait a year at a minimum. But sort of as a consolation to the notion, what about embedded honors in the spring semester? It's fall's coming up. This was summer. In the spring semester, as a way to offer what students might need. In fact, we were so enamored with the idea that in the fall, this was now last year, in the fall we waited to even get that second class going, waited 12 months to hear the report of how it went. And granted, there's still some development to that. We heard that it took longer to get off the ground and that it's continuing to progress, and I think that's fantastic. But here we are now, 12 months after that, and suddenly embedded honors is this reason worth delaying for 5 to 6 years for a pilot program when really it was only a stopgap consolation prize to begin with. And if we talk about the research, the big push seems to be a different pace and a different curriculum, which embedded honors was not. That was sort of a way to recognize exceptional work from people who had the same pace and same curriculum, which really doesn't fit the bill. And so I want to push back against the idea that this is new and that this type of pushback is just related to the idea of how we do business with new ideas, when it really, it's isolated to this particular push to fill in the gaps where enriched courses are currently offered, in addition to stopping the dismantling of them.
So can I ask you, when did we have a conversation, when did we have a work session to discuss this? That included administrators, teachers, anyone that had any relevant information about gifted programs. When did we have that conversation?
So what I'm referring to when I talk about when the whole board had this conversation, because the whole board has talked about additional classes many times. We started, in addition to English 10, it started with a look across the secondary in particular with our strategic planning conversations, where the 7 of us and the superintendent were in consultation. We asked about what should be our strategic direction, where are we off, especially when you look at strengths and weaknesses, what other schools and districts are offering compared to what we're offering, what people seem to want, what our gifted and talented studies said, what input from parents
So
and teachers.
I'll ask you
I
again.
just want to finish this thought. What they said, and so then we took some of that information and we kind of high-leveled it, decided what detail to provide. And remember, we wanted to provide specific question of what do you think of honors in the secondary core at a time when we were bringing in administrators and teachers from across the district in this very building. And we had some pushback against, not from most of us, but enough pushback to say, let's not get their opinion here. Let's wait and see if it's their idea. And I think that was a misguided notion, because it's not an idea that hasn't been considered. In fact, I'd say it's frowned upon. And that's why there's a push to get rid of some of these enriched classes. It's frowned upon, especially when you have administrators saying they're the same thing, it's just different students enrolled in them. So I would argue that the input has been ongoing from everybody who's a stakeholder in this. In particular, how did we ever lose those enriched classes? That was a grassroots loss.
So you're talking, Amir, you're talking.
That was teacher,
Okay.
well, there was teacher input.
Can I interrupt for a second?
One at a time,
Because
please.
you're talking very globally, and I will agree that we've talked about this globally multiple times. I'm talking specifically about the policy you're putting forth. This specific policy, when, as a full board, have we had an opportunity to discuss this policy with teachers and administrators in one room together?
Can I actually say something first, which is, so Amir, I've been on the board for many years, and I was here during the time period where the concept of looking at enriched classes and should we scale them back. I've never been in favor of scaling back the enriched classes, and I was part of the group that said, you know, if we're going to look at this, that's not something that the board is in favor of. So I want that particularly clear. In terms of the embedded honors, it was not an idea thrown out by a board member. I don't really know where that came from. This was a proposal made by the high school teachers to the school board, and by the principal, because I asked,
Yeah,
and
it
I
was.
even said, I said, is this what your proposal is to us, or is this something that we're coming up with? And Andy Beaton said, this is our proposal to the school board. So I just want to clarify a little bit of the background facts here, because I disagree with some of your characterizations. And I'm not aware that there's a movement to eliminate enriched classes throughout the district. To the extent that you think there's that movement, I don't agree with eliminating enriched classes throughout the district. And if that's the question, then we could simply state that we're not in favor of removing enriched classes. But that's not what's happening here. You're moving the ball in a completely further direction. So just with that note, and Ellen, you can go ahead.
Thanks. In an effort to try to not have to go through every single question, what I've done is I've created a little slideshow. So Zach, are you back there?
The question I have on the slideshow, which I heard about just about a minute before this started, which is, do you have copies for the public? Because if you don't, I don't think we can go through a slideshow. Our obligation is that whenever we have materials, we're supposed to have them available for the public.
Lenny,
at the
that
thing.
we have materials that we were just given in the session before that aren't even in the board book and will be put in tomorrow. So that is not uncommon practice.
So when we have a slideshow at these meetings, they're usually available in the back for people. So
No, they're not. There's an agenda in the back. There's not the whole deck, our whole packet. You can look at the agenda, but if you want to look at the packet, you have to have an electronic device to do that.
So what has not been posted that we're looking at other than this slideshow?
Things get walked in. I'm just trying to point out procedurally, we walk things in. We were handed a chart tonight in the work session that was not in the packet and will be put in the packet tomorrow morning. I think I don't see how we can pick and choose what things get walked in and not walked in.
So my understanding has always been that for regular meetings, that if we're going to have things walked in, we're supposed to have a copy available for the public. That's all I'm saying. I'm not aware of a different rule.
So every time something's been put in our green folder before a meeting, there's been a pile at the back of the room that everybody could see.
So my understanding is that there is always written copies available for the public, yes. If I'm wrong on that.
I think you're
don't know.
calling this on a technicality that's not accurate, Lenny.
But I have no objection to your going through whatever you're going to present. I'm not sure that you can have a slideshow, that's all I'm saying. I raised the question, if someone's got an answer to it, go for it.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I have been, people are accusing me of not being procedurally right or something, and I don't want that to happen. If you would like, it is a long slideshow. So if you want me to read it all, we will be here for a while, and I'm happy to read it. It will just be my comments, and then we can post them online. I actually am a little surprised by this, but if somebody else can confirm, I don't really care. It's just easier for everyone to see the slideshow.
I'm just going to object that we do walk things in, and I think we're not, this stuff happens on a regular basis. That's why we have the little green folder. That's why stuff gets put in our green.
Yeah, and I just am saying I don't know, and I don't really care, and I'll do whatever's the right thing. Should we look it up in policy? You're looking, should I look? Well, I have this queued up on my computer, so I don't really. Okay, so I'll just start through it while you guys look it up. Do you want to look it up?
Can I ask some questions about the content of the policy before we get into the, I thought we weren't doing
Okay,
anything.
so, I'll start talking. What I'd like to do is answer the question through a presentation. I'll start with a timeline, talk about the strategic plan development, the K-12 talent development framework, why now, why advanced academic courses, revisions, what the actual revisions of policy 601 are and what they are not. So I'll just start. The timeline of Policy 601 actually started back in March of 2017 when the board approved the gifted and talented study recommendations. It continued after that. In 2018, the school board decided to address GT during the strategic plan process. Meanwhile, in a parallel process, the administration began drafting the K-12 talent development pathway framework. In 2018 and 2019, the board has been working on the strategic plan over meetings for several months. The 7 members of the school board discuss and include the following strategic plan language into iterations of the strategic plan, including the final draft presented to the public. Action Area 1, Academic Excellence and Rigor. Priority Strategy B, provide advanced academic opportunities for all students. Outcome 2, honors courses offered in the secondary core and advanced academics in elementary. Actions include elementary pullouts with a qualified teacher. Administrators, building leaders, and teachers are involved in the development of the draft strategic plan, which includes the statement, honors courses offered in the secondary core and advanced academics in elementary. So honors courses offered in the secondary core emerged in this process and did not originate in the policy committee or in isolation of EPS staff. What is in Policy 601? 601 is educational competencies, academic standards, instructional curriculum. Numerous meetings in the summer of 2019 with proposed revision to 601 on agenda or otherwise mentioned in order to clarify how emerging board guidance would be defined in policy, as it has with prior strategic plan initiatives. So there's a timeline of meetings mentioning revision of Policy 601 in the Policy Committee. June 6th, at the end of the meeting, Member Michelson states his desire to incorporate emerging strat plan honors courses language into Policy 601. Requests adding in future agenda. This request and brief conversation was not recorded. However, Amir, I, Owen, John Schultz, and Sarah were present at that meeting. June 27th, board policy meeting agenda notes.
Can you clarify who Sarah is? Because
Sarah Shanley.
and it would be a quorum if I was incorrect.
Right, sorry. So at the next policy board meeting, the notes indicate for possible discussion at the July 15th meeting, committee requests 601 competencies. And then 2 other policies are noted. The committee discusses 601 revision elements with respect to honors. Notes refer to 601 with, quote, return these 3 policies to August committee meeting. Again, present, Amir, me, Owen, John, and Sarah, not Sarah. August 5th, policy committee meeting. No discussion, notes on the agenda say, just holding 601. Again, all of us are present. August 8th, after reviewing the Pathways documents and expressing concern at a prior Teaching and Learning Committee meeting that Pathways appears to be in contrast to the draft plan and is to be addressed in the strategic plan process, Member Jones asked to have Policy 601 added to the August 12th work session to sort out the differences between the two parallel paths to meeting advanced learning opportunities, the Pathways and strategic plan honors courses. And then on August 9th, Member Garby sends this message to the board. During Monday's work session, we'll discuss talent development pathways with Deb and Randy. That conversation overlaps with the proposal in our strategic plan to offer honors courses in the secondary core. Given that overlap, I'm sending you this attachment with policy language that Ellen, Owen, and I started drafting to put board conversations onto paper. The intent of including this document in our work session conversation is to identify where emerging board guidelines and current district initiatives stand in contrast to one another. Just want to pause on that. This policy was intended to bring the board together to talk about, quote, the intent of this document in our work session conversation is to identify where emerging board guidance and current district initiatives stand in contrast to one another. On August 12th, Superintendent Schultz emails the board that we will not be discussing Policy 601 at the August 12th work session. What was presented on August 12th was a K-12 Talent Pathways framework, and in it, the framework was worded quite vaguely. It's not clear what the district is actually proposing. It appears from the first page that this framework is quite similar to the goals and delivery of our personalized learning methods currently used in most of our EPS classrooms. It appears to prescribe an everyone in one classroom model for EPS classrooms, except for the accelerated pathway. And this is where I'll quote, the enrichment, advanced learning, and real-world application pathways are all, quote, provided by the classroom teacher, end quote. The accelerated pathroom is, quote, provided by the elementary talent development teacher or a secondary instructor with content expertise and experience working with advanced learners. So there is no stated endorsement of maintaining honors or enriched courses in the Pathways document. Working within this framework, the district could eliminate all current elementary GT pullouts and secondary advanced learning enriched courses. The framework appears to eliminate the ability to create any new enriched or honors courses in secondary unless they are accelerated courses. So Pathways appears to be in conflict with the strategic plan outcome 2, quote, honors courses offered in the secondary core and advanced academics in elementary. So on August 12th, at the board work session, the administration proposes the K-12 talent development pathways. After quite a bit of discussion, the board reaches consensus that the K-12 pathways framework needs to include wording that maintains GT pullouts in elementary and maintains all currently offered enriched classes in the secondary. And the policy committee members do not bring up draft revisions to the policy 601 as they had been requested. On September 5th, Policy Committee meeting, discussion 601 notes on the agenda for possible discussion, September 16 meeting, 601, educational competencies. Amir will talk with Lenny about when it can be brought to the full board. Again, this was the Policy Committee, including John. September 9th, the school board work session. I'm really sorry that I have to read this. This is really going to be really boring. But I'm just telling, there's been enough issues with the procedure that it wasn't vetted or talked about in policy. And in fact, I'll just keep reading. September 9, school board work session. During leadership updates, after quite a bit of discussion, the board decides to add revisions to 601 to the next work session in order to allow questions to be presented to the policy committee. On September 16th, the school board work session, there's much discussion about the process of developing and building 601 forward. Committee Chair and Member Fox comment that they think that nothing was done wrong by the policy committee. Board members on the policy committee are directed to respond to 50 questions provided by Member Allenberg, and as well as meet with John about the questions. On September 23rd, Board Policy Committee members meet with John, Randy Smasal, and Brian Bass and discuss a timeline for presenting the answers to the questions in Review 601. As part of that discussion, we requested that the answers to we present the answers to the questions and revisions to policy at the October 14th board meeting for a board vote on November 18. Also, because there may be a lack of consensus on responses to questions, each policy committee member will respond to the questions independently. The administration does not comment on the timeline or process and state that they will talk with board chair. October 3rd, 2019, policy committee meeting notes on agenda for possible discussion, October 14 meeting, 601 honors. Amir will talk with Lenny about adding as discussion item to October 14th meeting with John Schultz and John Schultz will check with Trevor about serial meeting. And with that, we are referring to the fact that I asked John for the assessment of the 601 revisions and for 601 to be presented to the Board Teaching and Learning Committee, and was told that that could not happen until he talked with Trevor about whether that was that was allowable under our open meeting laws. So the rest of my presentation will seek to answer the strategic and governance related questions raised at the September 16th meeting. However, many of the questions that were presented to us were of an operational nature or referred to the development of policy of the strategic plan policy, which is beyond what normally is requested of outcomes in the strategic plan. Therefore, I've not addressed those any of the operational questions. I've read Member Garby's thorough and thoughtful response to questions. I share his perspective and appreciate his response. Many of the questions in those 50 questions are answered in his response. And he actually addressed much of what I had to say. And so in the interest of time, I'll just address a couple of the things that I feel are important. In 2018, the board conducted an outbound survey and engaged Morris Leatherman to talk to all families of students who have left the district. The two most important factors for leaving the district to attend another public school were meeting learning needs and personal attention by teachers. For 15% of those leaving over the last 2 years to public schools, the most important factor that they mentioned was gifted and talented programs. Comparison to other districts was given to us as part of the GT study, and they report that neighboring districts offer comprehensive elementary programs that explicitly address the needs of advanced learners. Elementary schools in neighboring districts offer magnet schools or all-day schools within a school. Bloomington offers a Dimensions program, magnet program. Eden Prairie offers Mosaic magnet program. Minnetonka offers Navigator magnet program. Adjacent districts, Minnetonka and Eden Prairie, also offer both magnet programs and GT pullouts in each elementary school. Edina Elementary School offers gifted and talented pullouts in math, 3 through 5, and reading, 4 and 5. Amir also discusses statewide differences between EHS and other high schools. Improving advanced learning opportunity is a proactive financial strategy. According to our own district reports, with 15% of residents whose students leave EPS for other public schools, they state that the most important factor is gifted and talented programs. For every one of those students who leave, they take their state funding with them to another public school. The sum of those funds transfers totals between $150,000 or $300,000, depending on our school facts, per year, more than enough to fund any curriculum development that may be needed for advanced learning program. Similar additional funds flow out of the district each year for each cohort leaving, in addition to reversing to revenue loss due to prior years' departures of students. Secondary schools are not at capacity, and thus lost revenue is not recovered through in-migration. While there are one-time development costs for honors programming, the operational costs per pupil of providing honors courses are no greater than operational costs for standard courses. So there's just a couple other items that I wanted to mention. One was people had asked whether we had done our research. And the one study that, so I want to point to Amir's document. He adds a whole lot of research, but there's a couple other research documents that I would like to point anybody to that is interested. What 100 years of research says about the effects of ability grouping and acceleration on K-12 students' academic achievement. Findings of 2 second-order meta-analyses. And this is by Saying Steenberg and Hu from Northwestern University. She's a researcher director of for the Center of Talent Development. Michael Makel from Duke University. He is the director and assessment at Duke Talent Identification Program. And Dr. Olszewski Kublaus, I'm going to really mess up her name. But anyhow, she is the director of the Center of Talent Development at Northwestern University and professor in the School of Education and Public Policy. It's a long document, very interesting to read. It's findings looking over the last 100 years on the effects of ability grouping. And the conclusion is the preponderance of existing evidence accumulated over the past century suggests that academic acceleration and most forms of ability grouping, like cross-grade subject grouping and special grouping for gifted students, can greatly improve K-12 students' academic achievement. There is another research article from the National Bureau of Economic Research that by Courtney Collins and Lee Gahn that states that God, I'm getting tired of reading this. I'm really sorry, you guys. I wish I could have just put it up on the board. This study has valuable policy implications. Well, I'll read it. Does sorting students improve scores? An analysis of class composition. This study has valuable policy implications because, unlike many school policy variables, the composition of classes can often be changed with little need for increased funds. A school with a fixed number of classrooms and teachers can increase efficiency by rearranging students in the most effective way possible. This study suggests that creating classes with lower levels of dispersion of score or ability level may improve the achievement outcomes for students across the score distribution. And so another point that I find very important that is being missed in all of this discussion, which is my own personal, maybe the largest reason why I am concerned about of the direction the district is going in. It happens to do with equity and meeting the needs of all students. I want us to look at the experience of removing enriched LA-10 at the high school. Is the single class offering in LA-10 and at 9 improving the academic performance of all of our students? Of students in the middle? of students who are years behind? And how can we tell? Is this pilot of removing enriched LA10 successful enough at improving outcomes for all students to continue to become a model framework for K-12? I am concerned because the results that I look at since that condensing of LA 9 and 10 began, we have increased our students that are not proficient, and those are the students in the middle. So all students benefit with instruction targeted to their needs. I've had people talk to me that actually the class that we created is too hard for their student in the middle, and they would like and very much feel that the district should offer a course that meets their needs, which would be a standard course. So reinstating the former enriched class creates an opportunity to increase instruction time and material directed toward the needs of all students. And why is this critical to discuss now? For transparency. What direction is the district moving in? I don't know. I was at a discussion with staff over the strategic plan where they mentioned the outcome of honors and secondary core, and I overheard them say, well, I thought we were moving in a different direction. So I want to know. This is a discussion for the board for transparency, which is what we wanted to talk about when the board, when Amir asked, can we talk about this during the framework? I'd like to gain clarity and consensus by defining what we mean by core courses in the honors courses in the secondary core. I would like to get everyone aligned, the board and the administration and the teachers, to be able to offer increased learning. I would also like to be able to offer learning opportunities beginning as early as next school year. There's also urgency to respond to current realities. And also, why is it important now, is to inform the time study, which may recommend changes to the 2020-2021 K-8 schedule. And also, because the district has an 8-year review cycle for subject curriculum. Every new course defined in Policy 601, all of them are on the district curriculum review cycle for the current and next 3 years. If revisions to 601 are not dealt with at this time, these subject curriculum areas will not come up for review for another 8 to 10 years. So what is revised policy 601? It was a best effort to define and put into policy the intent of the board from the strategic plan. That's all it was. What are the proposed changes? I'm going to let Amir deal with, agree that Amir really defined them very well, but I want to say the additional things are that revised policy 601 ensures that the district and the elements of the strategic plan are aligned. It also simply continues successful educational strategies that are best practice and have been shown to be successful at EPS. What the revised 601 policy does not do, it does not change the course proposal process. It does not dictate curriculum. It does not create barriers to access for secondary students who feel that they are ready for more. It doesn't eliminate the ability to build strategies and effective on and off ramps to advanced courses. It doesn't eliminate the ability to create effective young scholars identification and targeted services. It doesn't preclude the district from embedding rigor into classes. It doesn't eliminate the flexibility of between-grade collaboration. It doesn't require the district to continue courses that are not meeting enrollment criteria. It doesn't eliminate the ability to create innovative new courses. It does not create an experimental or untested model of educational delivery, but expands upon educational delivery that currently works well. It doesn't eliminate the ability for the district to create a GT magnet school. It doesn't preclude the district from adding additional GT services to K-2. It doesn't intend to be the GT recommendations implementation plan. It doesn't eliminate the ability to develop subject-blended, for example, language arts and social studies courses, honors courses. It doesn't eliminate the ability to develop honors courses with real-world access and problem solving, or the ability to develop courses blending world travel with course materials. So I'm going to just skip this because it's getting really long. Policy 601 discussion. Here's my next steps. I would like to discuss this with the board and hear what you have to say. And I want to hear, does 601 accurately state the strategic initiative and outcome as stated in the draft strategic plan and to the administration during the strategic planning process? Does it? That's what we're talking about. We as a board drafted those words. What does honors courses in the secondary core mean? If it doesn't mean what's in this policy, I don't know how else to define it. And then I would like to bring this policy to a vote on November 18th. Thank you.
Could I offer a couple procedural comments? I'd like this to move forward, but it was, what, about a month ago that my vote delayed this because of the urgency that you were speaking to, Ellen. We were going to have this discussion at September's board meeting. You may remember that. And it was my vote that delayed it. I wanted to delay it a month to put some breathing room into this discussion. And I then later recommended two things. One, that we directly address Erica's 50 questions. And two, that we have a panel discussion talking about both sides. I want to talk about the panel discussion and why that didn't happen. I spent hours trying to get a panel discussion going, and it, with short notice with the election, just couldn't get people to present. So with good faith, I tried, didn't happen. The second thing is, in good faith, the answers to Erica's questions were going to be coming from your comments here, Ellen, and Amir's written statement. So that's what I intended in having that breathing room, and it gave Amir the chance that he had to refine his thoughts and for Ellen to create her presentation. Now, that said, I would like this to move forward, but I would be open to having a presentation from the teachers and from the administration about their thoughts about it in the next 3-4 weeks. So I'm open to that procedurally. But I myself am actually excited about the substance of this proposal. I want the full potential of all of our students realized in whatever way we can, whether it's special ed, dyslexic, mid-range kids, high-range kids. And this proposal targets our high-range kids, and we have a disproportionately large number of advanced learners in our district, and we are talking about filling out some holes in the honors courses. We're talking about 8. From my understanding of how much it would cost, it is not that much. I have a proposal from the College Board, which actually puts together the AP tests, and they have a curriculum for 10th grade literature that would cost, if we had 200 kids in it, it'd be about $2,000 or $4,000, which isn't that much. So Amir's documentation goes into great depth about the cost. It's not outrageous. There's been a lot of community support about this for a long, long time. And I don't know where I put it, but I've got the thick packet from the 2016 GT study, which documents even further in greater detail the academic research behind, thank you, the academic research behind and defense for separate curriculum for honors students. So I'm supportive of it on that level. And it gives our students more voice and choice. It gives more agency to our students, and I think that that's an exciting prospect. So
I do have some substantive comments, but before I get there, when Policy 601 in the current draft came up, I actually asked if there had been a substantive discussion of that with the administration, was told no. So yes, you ran through a whole list of events where process was talked about. I don't hear anywhere actually in there for substance. Second, Morris Leatherman actually told us that when he asked the follow-up question, what does it mean that students are leaving for not meeting learner needs? He said low and middle performers. That's the group he identified, not GT kids. So, okay. The 100-year study talks about ability grouping and says that actually putting kids in a class and having flex grouping within that class, but not having it a GT class, causes more students to achieve than simply having a GT class. That's what that 100-year study says. You said that you've gotten conflicting information from people in the district, so you'd like to know what the district's plan is, but then you're asking for a board-only discussion. So we can't get the perspective of the district in a board-only discussion. I think that we have to broaden it so that it's district. So those are just some procedural items. I don't know who wants to go first on substantive. I will say that the question is there a need for the honors classes that are proposed? Or is there a need for a more enriched program for our students? And if there is a need, and by the way, when we talked about need, we talked about our students meeting growth. And we do know that our high learners are meeting growth at a higher rate than our medium and low learners. And so that I'm not sure that in the materials in support of 601 that there is identified a need. You've identified an inconsistency in the programming, but not a need for it. Because need would focus, as we keep talking about, how are the students growing? And I don't see any map data within the materials. Let's assume for the sake of argument that there is a need for it. The next question is, we have to balance the need for those classes versus the other needs in the district. And that's one of the issues that I have, which is looking at things in isolation. So we could create a GT class, and that might serve the needs of the GT kids, great. It might cause other issues. But that doesn't address the needs of other students. So we need to take a look and say, as we develop programs, as we develop priorities, what is going to meet the needs of the broadest spectrum of kids? And so a policy that simply talks about advanced learners doesn't bring in the extra data. And that's the data that I would like to see. I think at one point there was a comment made that we don't know what the community thinks. And we still don't know what the community thinks. And so to go forward with this based upon a lot of people in the community want it, I'm not sure that we have data to back that up. I think that if we're going to address the needs of high learners, and I would always like to do that, there are multiple ways that we can do it. And Amir, you talk about the various things. You talk about compacted classes. They're kind of interesting, but maybe they have a flaw because there's no way to get in late, there's no way to get out. That's a development thing. For example, if you're in a compacted class and you want to get out, there's no barrier to getting out because you're actually ahead of the pace. You could then drop back to the other class. We already have credit by assessment, so if someone wants to get in late, all they have to do is show that they're ready to get into it. And by the way, there are students that take advantage of the credit by assessment. I know a number of kids who are taking AP biology. They didn't take bio. They didn't take enriched bio. They simply learned the work over the summer. The question is, what are the pathways that we want to create, and what are the most effective pathways? And once we get past all this procedural arguing, I think we have to discuss what are the best pathways. I know that if you're a middle school student and you do a compacted class, now you can do a high school class in 8th grade, for making the high school time period less stressful and more flexible. We know stress exists in the high school, so if you were to ask me, do I want 3 honors classes in the middle school, which historically have been more work, not necessarily higher level thinking, or do I want a compacted class that frees up schedule in the high school? I'd like to investigate the compacted class. I'm not sure if we mandate honors in every single class that we're going to have the flexibility to do honors plus compacted. And so to make a decision tonight or in 4 weeks and say, this is the rigid approach we have to take, I think is fraught with peril. The other thing is the embedded honors, and there are criticisms you levy about the embedded honors. It's not like we've had a trial run of the embedded honors. It rolled out for a few months. Nobody got any credit for doing it. And now we actually have it rolled out. We talked about it as a board, allowing and seeing what happens this year. That's, as I understand the concept, and it's always implementation that's key as opposed to the concept, but the concept is create higher level thinking in the students rather than more work. My kids sat through enriched classes after enriched classes, and they sat through GT programs when they were younger, and they came home and said, I asked for higher level work, I got more work. And I know that what you've written here is that this class is supposed to be substantively, will not be substantively the same as the standard class. So I think your goal is not more work, but higher level work. And I think that that's the goal of the embedded honors, which is, can we create a higher level of work? So is that a better approach than mandating an honors class? This is a discussion that I think we have to have with people who can explain what embedded honors would be, what the benefits of that versus having an honors program. And then the other issue I have is that this is a requirement that all this happens next year. So we're going to put this in place next year, and then we're going to have curriculum review, which might require changes in the class based upon the curriculum review cycle. Even if we're going to do an honors, a rollout over a number of years is a better approach. And again, we're going to go back. This is a resource allocation thing. We have 20% of our kids that are not testing proficient on MCA scores. Should we be looking at intervention versus an extra honors class? And again, let's go back to need. When I look at MAP scores, and we've seen them, and maybe there's data I haven't seen, but the low performers aren't meeting their growth targets. The high performers are meeting their growth targets. I don't want to do anything to dismantle the programs we currently have in place. Zero to dismantle the programs we have in place. And that seems to be raised as a specter here. And so I want it perfectly clear. I don't want to do that. I would like to have a gradual system where we can add more rigor, but I just might disagree whether it's better to do it through an embedded honors and a compacted system than a mandated honors class. Those are some initial thoughts. And to be honest, those are initial, because I also have questions about this, and we could kind of go for hours. But I know that Erica's had her little green light on, so maybe she has some questions.
Yeah, I have some questions actually as to how the policy is written that I think could have broader implications than what is intended. And I was just wondering if you guys could answer some questions for me about that. My first question is, from the policy board's perspective, what is the broad intent of policy 601? Why do we have a policy 601?
Did you say from the what perspective?
From your policy committee's perspective.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say there's anything about the committee here. This is.
Or why as a
Well, I think
district
it's
do we have a
important to note
policy
that.
601?
So this was from conversations among the 7 of us with John, with the strategic plan conversations. And we've talked about all of these things, which is why it was in our strategic plan. And so to the extent that it went to policy, it was to transcribe some of those conversations, to document what we said about honors, and to call out those inconsistencies.
Let me ask a clarifying question, I'm sorry.
We should keep this at the board level.
I'm sorry, let me ask a clarifying question. Before the language around advanced learners, why do we have a policy 601? Why do school districts have a policy 601?
It's clearly stated
And what is it?
You can read it. You have the policy.
the policy 601 is to define the school district's educational competencies, instructional curriculum, and academic standards, including state and federal educational requirements. So my question is, have you thought of, or have our district's attorneys been consulted to see if there's a legal issue with our general education policy detailing specific education requirements for gifted learners and our classes that are customized to the needs of advanced learners in a general education policy where we do not detail the educational needs of any other learners, especially those that are protected legal classes and guaranteed certain educational rights in our school district? Is that an issue that has been discussed? And I do want to mention that from a best practice perspective, we have 327 independently publicly operating school districts in Minnesota, and I've studied all of their Series 600 educational policies, and absolutely none of them utilize Policy 601 to define policies for certain groups of students. None of them. There are 4 to 5 cases where districts do have gifted policies or talked about advanced learners, but it's a completely separate policy. And the 601 policy is written in the broadest terms possible. And my concern is that there could be a legal implication to doing what you've done. That's my first question.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that other districts didn't have to go here, that they have these types of extra classes, and there's not a push to not have them. And I think we're in a different situation. I wouldn't say legal implication. No, school boards are the authority to decide what type of guidance you give your local district. I think Lenny has often talked about how it's wise to delegate so much to the professionals. And I wouldn't use the word expert. I think expert is losing its meaning in our community, in our country, frankly, in a lot of discussions. But to our professionals, to our experienced implementers, to our teachers, to our educators, it's wise to delegate a lot of that. Except when someone starts to have a different lens that they're looking through an option, rather than what's helping a child grow to meet the full potential, what's helping a child be better next month than they were this month, the next year than this year. When you start to say that we've got to save America, we've got to dismantle this type of curriculum, dismantle the systemic barriers, I start to hear somebody in a speech, and I don't hear them talking about a child anymore, and that's bothering me. And I think that's one of the big concerns. It's one of the reasons there's sort of a standoff at the moment where we hear, look, we'll agree, we won't get rid of that enriched one we have, but we won't add the next one. Like it's some sort of a power struggle. And I think if it makes sense to keep what we have, if you would defend that, if you would justify that, then I don't understand how that's necessary to meet student needs in 7th grade but not 8th, or in 8th grade but not 9th or 10th. And so it's a question of who decides, and at this point, I think it is appropriate to ask if a board should decide that we want a choice in curriculum, a choice in pace, and in particular, a choice where it is not fair to say the teacher can just handle it, to say there's going to be a different curriculum, a different pace, and the teacher can just handle that. You can't have different curriculums and different paces for all sorts of student needs and just say, we'll just handle it 2nd hour, we'll handle it 3rd hour, we'll handle it 4th hour. It also gets to the premise that this is a GT type secondary thing. There is not GT language arts, GT social studies in the secondary. There's a choice, and you can opt in. And it's true that there's GT in the elementary, in fact, for reading and also in 6th grade. But in the secondary, we say, you know what, it's time for you to decide what you want to bite off. And I've heard some people say, well, they can't do it all, so don't offer the choice. We already value students finding where their niche is. Try something this year, try something else another year, something that's actually only available if it's a choice you can make this year and make a different choice next year. It's not a disqualifier that they can't do it all. And I wouldn't say I rob anybody of their choice because you offer them a second choice. You know, and this is something that is for all students. In fact, the middle and the lower students might benefit from teacher time that's more directed at the pace and curriculum that they're looking for. In fact, this is not the end of it. This doesn't fix all that needs fixing, nor does all need fixing. But this is a step, and I think this is the step with the most reluctance from people who would otherwise make a decision based off of the best that we can do with best resources, best knowledge, best practice. We have best teachers, best spaces. There's so much where we're getting the best advice, and I don't think we're getting the best advice with regard to how do you help every student grow. Because I think there's a push to say, well, first of all, they have to all be in the same room. From there, we'll do the best we can. And that bothers me that there's that qualifier put up front. And I think there isn't much of an alternative. We hear the compacted, and I agree with you about compacted being an interesting and a valuable option. In fact, we've this year started the 6th grader in science, which means when this 6th grade cohort's in 8th grade, there's going to be the standard science, enriched science, and the compacted year got there. So you can have all three, and that might be a beautiful thing. It might be necessary, it might be wise. You know, we don't know exactly, but I wouldn't say that it's one or the other. I do think, and just a small point, that there isn't the off-ramp. We heard that explicitly from the administrators, that the off-ramp, it's a downside, and it's not a reason to veto the idea, but you can't just bail out on a course that merged 3 years into 2 and say, I'll just chill, and I guess I've already covered this, or whatever the idea is. That's what we were told. Now, you may have heard an update, but that's a problem. And to the extent that there are students who are middle or lower end who aren't getting what they need, that's a real concern too, and I don't think that's addressed enough. You know, math actually did a great job addressing that because they introduced the bridge support, where you're trying to keep them on grade level, but you're giving them some extra support. Some schools have had success with that, some not. I think Edina is wise to try that, and I think it's important. There's so many things that are important. We're doing some right now, like the Sunday Essentials we've heard about, some of the other initiatives that are ongoing. It's important to fire on all cylinders, and I would never want this to preclude something that's essential elsewhere. But frankly, you're not going to find a more cost-effective plan. New courses are not that expensive, and if all you're doing, what did you say about distributing students differently, say, for example, for a particular subject in a particular grade, what pace and curriculum would best fit you? Like, this is trying incredibly hard to be responsible to all students and leaving a lot on the table for what else is next. The reason this is getting a little different treatment is because this is getting a little different treatment. This idea of whether there should be different courses is frowned upon, is resisted, and the best we can have right now is a neutral zone where whatever you have is what you have, as if our wisdom says we should go with the status quo bias.
Is there any way I could get the question I asked answered?
You know, that's a standard question that we would run through legal, so with the policy committee, we'd be happy to run that through legal.
So this hasn't been run through legal yet?
No, we've been trying to get this talked about in policy for a while, and then we didn't think that it was necessary to really speed it through because we didn't realize that pathways would be developed and that it would be so different from what the goal of the outcome from the strategic plan. So if you listened, we put this policy on hold because we didn't really think we needed to move this forward. And when we presented it and we wrote that email to the board, we were just saying, look, let's try to sort this out.
I think one of the first things that you guys need to do if you want to push the policy forward is to have legal look at it, because I think it's actually could be legally problematic to discuss certain groups of students in a general education policy and not necessarily others, which leads me to my other question is, I think if you look at what other districts are doing, that it might be better to pull this out of policy 601 and create a separate policy about how the district wants to differentiate learners or have a gifted and talented policy. So I guess I'm a little confused as to why it's appended to the bottom of 601. Why wouldn't we leave that to be a general education policy and create a new policy? It just seems that would be a better practice.
Do you see a difference between board guidance in policy and board guidance in a new policy? I'll take
I'm
under
talking about-
consideration. I'm ready to move on to a different point. I'll write that down. I think we should ask
purely-
somebody, but I don't know that that's
I'm
moving much
purely-
forward right now.
Well, but what I'm saying is that if there's a legal issue with having that in policy 601, there's going to have to be other ways around that. So all I was saying is if you look at what other districts are doing, that's what other districts are doing.
To jump in for a second here, I brought this up, Matt, I think you want to go pretty soon here, too. I brought this up in the past. To me, that's not a concern because the board, what the board makes as policy is what is legal. I'm reading from state statute 123B here, governing the school boards. Subdivision 7, policymaking. The board shall make, when deemed advisable, change or repeal rules relating to the organization and management of the board and the duties of its officers. So we make the board, or we make the policy. So, so this is consistent with the state statute. Now, that doesn't completely cover the legal question, but I think this covers a lot of it, and this is why I've never thought of this as being a legal issue. And subdivision 8, right after it, is duties, where there's a bunch of verbiage here, but what's relevant here is we have, as at the board, have the duty to prescribe textbooks and courses of study. So I'm not advocating getting into the weeds and creating any classes, setting up any curriculum, but we have the ability to do that, but we delegate it away. So we as the representatives of the voters of Edina have the authority to construct our policy as we would like.
I'm not saying we don't have that authority. I'm saying it might be legally problematic to utilize a policy 601, a general education policy, which is supposed to define the policy goals for our entire district. And within that policy, only then identify gifted and talented students and how we want to educate those students. That it could be legally problematic from an equal protection clause, which has nothing to do with us, that we need to take a look at that and make sure that language does not need to be removed. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we don't have the right to.
And take it back to committee.
That's all I'm saying.
Matt, did you have something you were?
Yeah, I just realized I haven't spoken yet, so I thought I'd say something. Just as a framing comments, this might be a good idea. It might be. The process and the evidence of how we got to today is incredibly flawed. So as a board, and I pushed for this really hard myself, we all felt it was important to do a strategic plan. We felt it was important to balance the budget, where I spend 90% of my time, and think about how we allocate our resources across all of the student base. We thought about how it involved the community, how it involved the administration, how it involved the teachers, and how we'd get to a point at which we could determine which needs to prioritize in a resource-constrained world, which is what we're in. If the front row can just stop for a second. In this situation, we're trying to figure out how to make a decision around which students we're supporting over others in a silo. Because I don't agree with any of these numbers that have been provided at all whatsoever. Ellen, I did say that there's nothing done that was wrong. And by that comment, I meant people, 3 people, having ideas they bring to the board never bothers me. I don't agree with what happened. The word wrong and bad are different words. So I still think it was a bad process. I still think that what happened was frustration built up amongst the 7 of us over 16 to 18 months that we wanted to move faster. We wanted more data. We wanted better endpoints. And we wanted to figure out how to take $124 million and spread that across the whole district. But right now we're at a point at which, Amir, I do think we have pre-calc in the books. Ellen, I don't agree with the first 5. These don't, because each of those don't statements do actually have a reactive nature in your second to last page of this will not affect this, this will not affect this. It was the second to last slide that you read off. They will affect other things. There is a trade-off. We just said there's no trade-off, no trade-off, no trade-off. So what worries me is that we haven't followed a process. We haven't gotten public feedback from the strategic plan. We haven't balanced the needs of all the learners, and we're unilaterally choosing one group to prioritize over others. This was never our intent 18 months ago. I take personal failure responsibility that we didn't bring the strategic plan forward to the community in 2018, and that we're in 2019 finally having these sessions, because it was an initiative I said I would drive. And I think that as the 7 of us, we've done our best. We've had some challenges with consultants getting information, but at the end of the day, we knew what we needed to do, and we didn't do it. So now we're at a point where we have to make really smart decisions with limited resources. And again, this could end up being a good decision to put these courses in place, but we're not going to have the information in 2 or 3 weeks, and we're not going to have one panel come in and give that to us. And we're not going to get to the point at which we understand the fiscal implications of all the different groups and their needs and community feedback in this truncated timeline. So I understand that there are people on this board that really feel strongly about moving in this direction. And I'm super understanding of trying to get there with you, but I can't do it on this timeline. And I can't do it with a lack of consideration for all the other groups that we have to think about. We had one parent here tonight speaking about how she has gifted kids and a child that needs special needs or additional support. And that child has had his or her, I'm not sure I caught the gender, resources cut, while we're now going to continue to add more choice to the top end of learners. Language Arts 10 has been referenced multiple times, and I know that is a big buzzword or a big issue still in this district. I've received 0 emails about Language Arts 10. I don't know if you guys have in the past 14 months that have been negative.
That's not true.
Okay.
Got emails.
Okay, then forward them to me because I don't recall seeing them. So the point that I'm making is that this is being done in a silo by the 7 of us, and I don't support the process that we're undertaking. So, and also the quorum tonight has been just brutal. But I think overall, I don't understand the process that we're undertaking as a group of 7.
Debate going on here, and these are our children. I'm just absolutely at a loss as I'm out on this election. I don't know why we're still having this discussion. We have been talking about these courses for a long time. We approved this course in a bubble. These courses were approved. All of these arguments are just arguments for us to stop this discussion. If there is an ideological issue here that we need to address, it's time to address it. I hear us say things, it's about budgets, it's about process, it's about who was and wasn't at the table. I've sat at the table for many years hearing this discussion at different levels. I'm not going to, just because on this one issue where some board members said, finally, we want to try to do something, that now it's all about process and budget. We've never approved a course as a one-off without having to put it in the context of the entire district. They're valid arguments, but it's not how not how everything has come to the table over time. We are not picking winners and losers amongst our children. Chris Moquist tonight said it best. He doesn't have advanced learners. He's saying, go deeper with this policy. Not just our advanced learners and filling the gap in what I used to think was maybe 4 classes, but maybe it's 7 or 8. What about on the other end?
What is wrong with choice for our kids? I'm just at a loss that we're here and that we're still fighting about this and nobody can give me an answer.
Okay, no talking from the public. I know we've had some people
We just
jumping
talked
in.
about 2 policies tonight that are around 504s and IEPs. But again, this is not about picking one student group over another. When you tell parents that their kids that are advanced learners are just fine, they don't need more resources, you know whose kids actually get hurt the most is our underserved kids who don't know the right people of how to get around the system. They don't have the money to go outside of the system. Let's actually have a real discussion about this. And I would agree with Mr. Moquest. Let's expand these types of policies and talk about how we address our kids with needs. Let's talk about more ways to intervene. Let's make sure that when we're looking at data for our students and they're showing that they should be a blue student based on our colors and they're not in the classroom. Is anybody calling that out? Or a green or a red or wherever they're at? It's about every kid, and I will not, as a board member, sit here and be told that I am picking one student group over another because we serve every single one that comes into this building.
Just so it's clear, that's not been the tenor of the discussion. In fact, as we talk about adding choice, my question is, we need to ascertain needs. And you even said we need to talk about kids with need. So we need to determine the scope of what the needs are and then address those needs. And so if one group has a slightly higher need, maybe we need to put more emphasis on that particular group. We are not approving a single course. And by the way, the concept of approving courses in silos, we've been talked about not doing that on a going forward basis for several months now. So this isn't new and it's not related to Policy 601. It has been raised for a year at this point about not doing things in a silo because we have to, our job is allocating resources. I don't agree that Pathways is different than the strat plan. There was a comment made about honors in the secondary in the strat plan. I know people like to think about this differently, but we approved honors in the secondary in the strat plan with the express statement that embedded honors might satisfy honors in the secondary. That's exactly what the board voted. Yes, that's exactly what the board voted. That was the discussion that night. And Amira, you remember that. That was,
If you don't
it was a
mind.
might.
So what we said was honors in the secondary core, these courses might not be a broad enough goal, and perhaps we should expand to honors level content to include adding more compacted, to include the consideration of embedded honors. There was never, I don't think anybody on this board said that embedded honors alone might be enough for any of it.
So the statement was made that embedded honors might satisfy the honors in the secondary.
No,
and that was,
no, that we might broaden the language in the strategic plan to be an umbrella term that would cover honors courses in the secondary core, would cover compacted idea, would cover embedded honors.
So we have a different recollection, but I will say this. Nevertheless, the goal of the board should be to determine the district-wide needs and try to develop policies that meet those district-wide needs as best as possible and not go one at a time through areas. And when we talk about it's easy to add another course, have we asked any of the teachers if it's easy just to add another course? I mean, that's the other part that's missing from this discussion, is finding out from the people who would have to implement the policy what would be involved in doing so. And by the way, that does lead me to a question, which is, when you say that a class will not be substantively the same as the standard class, so give me an example. We could take pre-calc. In what way is that not going to be substantively the same to meet this policy?
What I can give you is the concern, and I think I mentioned this earlier, the concern among our administrators, even our principals, 2 of the 3 secondary, I remember explicitly saying the courses aren't that different. What's different is when you look in the door, what you can see, which bothers me, because you're trying to say that you've summarized what's going on with learning and growth and need just by looking in a window, but also that the courses aren't that different. That's a huge problem to bring that to light. We've also heard the opposite, though, that the enriched courses are substantively different and they are meeting needs. And so this doesn't try to answer that question about what's going on, but it lays down the expectation that if you're going to offer a choice in pace and curriculum, you better follow through.
Okay, so that didn't answer my question. So you wrote a policy. It says that the advanced class will not be substantively the same as the standard class. That's a direction that you've driven from the board. So I'm now sitting there as a teacher or an administrator trying to create a pre-calculus class that's not substantively the same. Tell me what it looks like. Tell me what you're requiring here.
So I don't think that is something I'm going to be able to tell you. I don't think that is something that you're asking me to tell you in other contexts. Would you want me to show you an exam, to talk about a unit pace, to talk about formatives or summative? I don't think you want that. But I will remind you, we had enriched pre-calculus, so I might refer you to what that course was as a starting point.
And I've looked at a number of our enriched classes, and the curriculum, a lot of times they are parallel curriculums, enriched and regular. And the reason I ask is because someone's going to have to implement this policy. And you've talked about how you're not sure, you hear different stories about sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. I'm just trying to understand, if I vote for this policy, what am I directing people to do? And that would be across, I think, 8 different courses.
Right, so I'm very aware that the board needs to hear from the teachers. That's not ever, that hasn't been a doubt. I requested that this go to teaching and learning. And as it has appeared on the policy committee frequently, and I never ask for administrators to be brought in or teachers to be brought in, but they just appear. So I guess I need to be more direct this time and say, at the next policy meeting, we need to hear from the teachers. So, I mean, I guess that's what I need to do. But in the past, I didn't have to do that. It would go on the policy, and we would really talk about it. But in the past, also in the development of this policy, we were in such an it was just basically conceptually, well, what would this look like? And honestly, I just want to make sure that we are very clear that we're not clear on what we thought second honors in the secondary means. We still aren't. There's room for listening. There's a lot of room for listening and trying to unify the community, and especially the educational community. I don't ever want to make this appear that we are going to be doing this in a box. The last policy meeting, I asked for it to be sent to teaching and learning. So it's not that I don't want to hear from the teachers. I actually reach out to them when I can, when I see them, to try to figure out how this would fit. Some of them have told me, yes, we really need an honors class because that opens up the opportunity for me not to be stretched thin from dealing with my upper end and the lower end and not meeting anybody's needs as well. So I have heard that from some teachers, and I do want to hear from the teachers, and I hope that they can be scheduled at our next policy meeting, and then we can sort out and hear from the administration how this can materialize and or not. What are the options? It's been kind of a funky process, I agree, but when I see that there's two really different things happening between what the administration says and what that vision was, we had to take a moment and stop and say, what is it that is the direction of the board?
So, by the way, I think that if we're going to have teachers or administrators at this point, this should just go to the entire board rather than to a committee.
Of course, that's fine.
So can I just interject? And I want to make it very clear that there's elements of this that I actually really like. I think there's certain areas that we don't serve our advanced learners well. I think we can do a lot more for our advanced learners. My frustration is that I think this discussion should be part of a broader strategic planning process. And without being able to do that, it is very hard for me to know from a prioritization perspective, how do I fiscally prioritize these things? And the notion that creating advanced classes and having different tiers of classes is going to benefit all learners is, quite frankly, a little offensive to me, having a son that has significant learning differences. So I just think we need to acknowledge that this policy is for advanced learners and gifted learners. And we have a lot of kids in our district that need a lot of support. And it's really unfair to ask me to vote on this, not knowing how much it's going to cost, not knowing what we're going to prioritize from a strategic planning perspective. And the reality is we have limited fiscal resources, so there will be a trade-off. And that's the part that bothers me so much. All I'm asking is that we can have this conversation as part of a broader conversation in our strategic plan. I don't understand the urgency to pull this out and do it in a silo. I think that does a disservice to all of our students in the district. And what if we end up saying, like, we can actually do more than what this says? We can do summer programs for advanced learners. There's so much we could do with advanced learners. I guess I just don't even really understand why we're discussing this now.
So I wouldn't say it's for a summer program for advanced learners would fit the bill. I think this is about what education we offer during our school year in our public schools when we've spent all this time on the facilities and the transportation. Our budget's $100+ million. We need to be doing the right thing throughout the 9 months. And by the way, that's where we've already spent all of these top-level dollars. What we're looking for is the curriculum writing time, which we have a list of the courses we've approved over the last 8-9 years. I mean, it's not actually all that much. In fact, one of the most expensive experiences we had was when we had to overhaul pre-AP English 10 for the mainstream offering. Not counting that evaluation cost where you spent, a number of months with consultants and focus groups, which was an extra $16,000. But aside from that, there was $35,000. Most of that textbooks meant to serve every student in the 10th grade who's taken this class. And I know that's a lot. I don't think any other class would be that much because textbooks are where the costs are. That and Project Lead the Way they're very expensive opportunities. But textbooks are where the costs are, and none of the other classes, for example, Enriched Language Arts 8, that one exists, 9, or 6, would likely have 22 sections like our 10. So I think we're looking at a fraction of the cost. I tried with my assessment to give you a fair estimate that was actually rounded up significantly. I think we do absolutely need, once we say, okay, let's give the direction to the administration, because they haven't had direction from us yet. They've been privy to some of the conversations, but they have not had board direction, and none of us can offer direction individually. We need to have a vote as a board to offer direction. But give us, please, a better estimate, a more accurate estimate about where these costs are. With this curriculum writing, which, by the way, we outsourced a lot of the, we need to give direction to give that cost estimate. They don't have one for us because we haven't asked for one as a full board, which I think we should do. Let me finish this thought, please. The curriculum writing, which isn't that much, even when we outsourced the pre-AP English 10, there was some outsourcing of curriculum writing. It still was very modest. The textbooks are expensive. That's true. They had an almost, $7,500 in teacher training opportunity too, which may or may not be necessary. Perhaps the teachers don't need, that was like AP level training, I think, or something to meet those levels of need. They may not need nearly the cost, not even in fractional proportion to what that class was. And yet it still wasn't actually all that much. And so if we if we say this is somewhere around the $200,000 mark for 8 courses, $25,000 each, I think we've rounded up. I would like to hear a more accurate number. But in a one-year budget, fixed cost, like one time, it's done. It's not an ongoing expense. It actually hasn't precluded anything. And so I object seriously to the premise that we're pitting student against student. We're picking one group over another. If anybody who thinks this is a better course for their pace or curriculum can opt in, I would ask people to stop calling it a GT opportunity, because it's no more GT than any other enriched or AP class we offer, which, by the way, everybody should try a few of those over the course of their secondary.
This lists gifted and talented and advanced. The policy is both a gifted and talented.
Gifted and talented is holding harmless. This is what we offer with Highlands actually moved to push in a couple of years ago.
These are the questions that we need clarified before it's the gifted and talented is not holding harmless because you're dropping down language arts a grade.
No, it's holding it the same. We can fix the language to clarify and say.
Language arts for gifted and
language
talented
arts shouldn't be
starts in
dropping down
4th grade.
Yeah, and that's where we're
This policy says 3rd grade.
Okay, so I think we're going to have to figure out next steps, because I think everybody's kind of said various things. I'm hopeful that people have said, I mean, I can always say more, but I don't really want to.
Letty, can I ask another financial question really fast?
Sure. But I still want to get to next steps.
I know, but I buy into your, I can buy into your, like, I averaged out the classes and stuff like that for.
No, it wasn't average even. I took the high.
Well, no, well, the high average for high school, but for adding separate honors classes to middle school, that's a much more complex process that I think needs a completely different financial look. And I don't think just simply taking the high average of how much it would cost to implement that class is an acceptable look at what we're essentially doing is changing from a middle school model to a junior high model. And in doing that, it might actually impact the number of sections of music that we can offer and things like that we can offer. So we will be changing the way we actually give classes to students. We might not have flex schedule. So those need to be taken into consideration because that's a different budgeting situation. Yeah.
No. I would think it's wrong to put the fear in people that we're cutting music suddenly. I just heard that for the first time, and I want to push back strong against that. There's nothing in here about hiring more teachers, which is where significant costs are. There would be an opportunity to write some curriculum, to buy some books, maybe to do some teacher training. Those are exceptionally modest. You won't find more modest costs, and they're all one time. And it's not at all going to start cutting programs. I think it's wrong to put that fear into people.
That's not a fear.
And
That's
I would say that
actually
if someone can't do it all,
that actually
they have
came
to,
out of our middle school study that our administrators presented to us.
Say that again.
They came back. They presented to our board 1 year ago the middle school time study. And if we wanted to keep a middle school model, or if we wanted to change our middle school model, and they recommended that we keep our middle school model. And the middle school model involves giving students more choice, which is why we deliberately don't have honors classes at every level. And in their recommendations, they said to us, if we change the framework of our middle schools, then we will, quote, have fewer opportunities for exploratory classes. So these are the things that I think we need to keep in mind, that there are impacts to your policy that we might not have taken into consideration to understand it's not simply changing things to 2 honors, from honors and not honors. There could actually be downstream implications that we don't understand, and that's why we need to have a discussion about it.
So I don't recall anybody saying that we can offer 2 enriched LA but not 3, 1 enriched social studies but not 3. Do you guys know, like, what was that? We might just have a different memory, but I don't think anybody ever said that if you offer another enriched social studies that someone could opt into instead of the other, that the middle school model would, I don't understand what you're referring to.
Because if we have more classes that the kids have to schedule into, so as opposed to right now, it's much more flexible because they can go across like 8 different science classes, and they can do it any period of the day. If a student...
You can't do it all, that's for sure.
There's a difference between not being able to do it all and not being able to do it. It's just picking social studies or enriched social studies. It's still one slot in a child's schedule.
But I don't think as a board, we understand what doing this will do to change the model of our middle school, which we literally just had a discussion about 1 year ago. And I'm concerned and don't understand that.
Please don't talk out loud. Thank you.
Why we wouldn't actually bring up that discussion again and bring our administrators in and say, if we do this, this, and this, will there be changes to our schedules at our middle school? What will the impact be?
So that's a perfect segue to next steps. So we will have feedback on the strat plan by the end of this month, if not a little bit, before the end of the month. So that will give us some ideas on what the community is thinking in terms of the strat plan goals. Now, we've talked about getting input from teachers, we've talked about input from administrators, we've talked about a panel. So it seems to me that one thing we need to do is say, okay, so here's a policy, draft policy 601. What are the implications of adopting that policy, right? I mean, don't we all want to know that?
Yes.
Okay. So do we want to set up basically a work session where people who are able to answer the questions, and in fact, I kind of thought that was what was going to happen over the last month with Erica's questions. So I think we need to kind of go back and say, what questions do we have? Because if we're going to put together a group of people to answer questions, we have to tell them what they're coming for and what the specific questions are. Otherwise, it becomes a nightmare.
Lenny,
And-
I thought
yes.
there had to be kind of a majority for asking these types of questions, because I know in HR, we've talked about, questions and one-offs and, too much time. It's a list of 50 questions.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't see why, it seems to me that if only one person asked for the 50 questions, why is it mandatory that those have to be answered?
So I don't think all 50 need to be answered. I think a number of them were process-related, and people that we would call in wouldn't have answers to those questions anyway. The people on the committee would have had answers to those questions. So that probably eliminates, maybe even 30 of the questions. But I keep hearing people say, oh, I want to hear from teachers. And so it seems to me that we do have a consensus that we want questions answered about the implications of adopting this policy. And when that includes what's the impact on other things that we could do. I mean, it seems to me that there's a general consensus on types of questions that we have. I'm happy to participate in trying to put together a cohesive list of questions. Amir, I would request that you join that particular group, since you put together a fair amount of work, and so I think that you've thought about this, and you may have your own questions about the implication from the draft policy. And then since Erica is the one that put together the 50 questions that I'd like to whittle down, I would ask for her to be on that group, and we can either get the board to approve the questions or rely upon the three of us to come up with questions to form a panel. But I do want board input on who's going to be on the panel. It seems to me, and representative teachers, I think John and I, we had talked about someone from the state.
That was from several experts from the state, several experts from the state. There's some other universities that have experts in this that we can bring forward, so there's several names that we can.
So part of what I see the questions are is, what's the impact within our district? And then the other is, what's general best practices? So I view those as two separate areas. Because I think that if we're going to go forward, we want to adopt best practices, but we want to adopt them consistent with what we're trying to accomplish within the district. Do people agree, disagree?
Well, I guess go ahead. We talk about best practices, and I guess, some of that's, I hope, going to be based on data, and some of that I think is going to be based on opinion, too. And I would say, did we go through this much discussion and thought and demanding of answers when we switched language arts to being a single class for both 9th and 10th grade. Because I don't think we did. Now, granted, I wasn't on the board at the time, but I've looked back at the materials that were presented, and it was pretty short. So, again, I would say we can have this panel, but I'd like to understand better what's coming from this panel.
I think
Because
what's
I think
coming
this
from
is going to come, this to me is starting to feel not very much based in just pure data and best practice.
I think for me, what's missing right now is I have no data to indicate that this is a student need. I have no information. I've never been able to speak with any of our teachers about this topic. I haven't. If you can point to a work session when I have, please let me know. I have not. I haven't been able to speak to anyone that is a subject matter expert in gifted and talented learning. There's half of the new written thing is for gifted and talented. So if we're going to write into policy what we want for gifted and talented, don't we want to talk with people that are experts in gifted and talented and make sure what we've written makes sense?
And I have no problem with that, but the bulk of the changes that have been discussed tonight are just general enriched honors type courses, which can be registered by any student. So just focusing on gifted and talented
I'm not
only
just
is my
focusing on,
point.
I said I would like to bring a subject matter expert in gifted and talented, who also could talk about advanced, learning for advanced learners. I don't understand as a board how or why we would not want relevant, good information before making a decision.
So I'd suggest you put the discussion of elementary school work into an initiative for the elementary school, which might come as early as a month or 2 or 3, I don't know, but
Well, then it
this
should be
doesn't.
pulled out of the
No, I'll
policy.
just clarify, this holds what the status quo is steady, with the one exception, which is the school that stopped pullouts a couple years ago. But for the most part, it holds it steady, and so it raises it up to, the assurances are written down. And I wouldn't say you can't write down the assurances without having another panel. I would say that you write down the assurances, and then any change that comes down the line would have to receive, again, the board approval, just like, frankly, we pretty much said, when we said that there's no longer on the horizon, there's no push to change any or fold in, I think was the language, some of the gifted and talented programs. But I would say that's a separate conversation, and it shouldn't get wrapped up into something that's for the secondary generally.
Then it should not be in the policy. It should be taken out of the policy, because I do not want,
Writing down the assurances.
nor will I approve a policy for gifted and talented where we have not had a chance to talk about how can we best meet the needs of gifted and talented students? Because quite frankly, I think we need to expand that to lower grades.
We have a whole study and recommendations of how to meet their needs. I don't know why we say that we don't have any of this. We did a study. It's right there.
So I think it's important to get some of these questions answered, but I'm not signing off on any process that makes this another 18-month or even 6-month process. I think we need to have a better cost estimate. I think we need board direction that should be worth administrator time to tell us if $25,000 per class of the 8 classes is too high, if it's just right, too low. More discussion around the impact and best practices, but again, there's so much out there that we say we're going to look for best practice, and frankly, I struggle to find an example of when we could all agree on what literature, what input, even with start times. We heard valid arguments about best practice from both sides. We heard it from teachers on both sides. We heard a lot of different perspectives. Some of it was about neuroscience, and some of it was about individual children or individual families. So I don't sign off on any process that imagines we're going to find consensus here when we couldn't find it there. So, I don't know, that's just somewhere I think my thoughts are.
Right, and then the other piece of all of this is, actually, are we developing a policy that's proactively addressing some of the issues that we're seeing happening in our community? And whether or not an expert is going to tell me that embedded honors may be, and it may be, very good at serving the needs of our kids, But am I going to convince the families that are looking at Edina and comparing us to another opportunity, whether or not we will be their choice school because of that? I have to say that we should be looking proactively at what the community is looking for in schools as far as programming. And we do know that people are unsatisfied enough to leave our district because of that.
We know people come to the district because of what we offer. So I think if you were actually the one that said at the last meeting, you don't know what the community's thoughts are on this.
Yeah, that was before I remembered to look up in the Leatherman survey.
Which said that failure to meet the low and middle kids is what's driving people from the district.
It asked what the main reason for your decision was for leaving the district. That was, what is the main reason? And it was 15% said gifted and talented programming.
All right, so my recollection was when he asked the question, he told the board that the main reason that people gave for not meeting the needs was not meeting the needs of the low and middle learners. But let's get
Well,
back
I
to...
can show you where that is.
Let's get back to process, because it seems to me that we should be able to agree upon next steps. And Amir, if you want a narrower scope, I've asked you to participate in putting this so that you're quite able to raise that point and push it forward. And again, if we can't figure it out among the three of us, then we'll just be back here before the full board.
Well, in any event, I think it's important to come back here. I think this was important to have on camera. There were recollections shared with the public or summaries, sometimes motivated summaries, that couldn't possibly capture. Nobody watching this video could possibly summarize it to somebody else on another moment, outside from saying you should watch the video, which they couldn't do if we didn't have it at a regular session. So I very much appreciate the chance to have this discussion in this format, because it's something that's important. And actually, to a point Matt brought up before, there aren't many issues that seem to split the board like this one, and we do tend to work well together on so much. If we all agree now that maybe you're not the quickest, but we work fairly well. This is unusual. It's unusual for something to say split people who all have the same goals in mind, and that's doing the best that we can and appreciating the people, the teachers, the administrators who are doing the best they can. And it's a sensitive question. In some phrases, people would refer to two different courses as tracking. And that's a terrible word in education. Others would say tracking is when you kind of pick, not to pick on a country in Europe, but to pick in about fourth grade which direction somebody's going, and to give them a pipeline that just shoots them right out in that direction that you knew they'd go. And they don't have any chance to change their position. They don't have the on-ramps and the off-ramps. They're not given the high-quality education. And because we're talking about high-quality, best program we can offer with all of the bells and whistles that our teacher can put in and still keep the class kind of focused and going and monitored, with the emphasis on individual growth, which frankly I heard an administrator say was selfish, but individual growth, it's not enough to say that students are already fine, they'll be fine, they already met the standard. Everybody deserves to grow. So if we have a plan that's looking at that for everybody, supports, some of them will be ideas we haven't frankly heard of yet, figure out what they cost, figure out how you're going to sequence them. I mean, stemming the summer learning loss is a pretty ambitious goal. If you're not excited about that, holy cow. So we have got some big endeavors. This is relatively old and affordable, and yet it's a major sticking point. And frankly, I think the district would be better off if we get on to the other stuff rather than making this the focus of an extended process. But it's not tracking, because you have everybody on an opportunity path for college if they want it. We've talked about creating partnerships for other opportunities if you want it. We've talked about everybody should have the best general education they can. But some need faster and a different curriculum. So it's frankly, it's almost like you imagine the old system being low, medium, high, and double high. And what we have is somewhere with the double high and high kind of merged and the medium and high kind of merged. I think we're kind of in between there. But these are, no matter what class you take in our schools, you're going to have a great teacher. It's not like we're compartmentalized what the teachers are. A great curriculum, great peers, great experience. I haven't heard anything other than that. But the exact mechanics of whether there are two classes or not are divisive at this moment.
Just one last thought real quick, because I only spoke the one time, is that just to boil this down to one thing, because I do appreciate what you said a few minutes ago about the idea that the seven of us usually work toward a conclusion together, and we had the same general ideas in mind. And so with that as a concept, what I feel like we're kind of going from the tactic all the way to a big ideological thing and back and forth. And I don't think any of the seven of us have an ideology around pitting kids against each other or groups against each other or not. My perspective that I've tried to voice tonight is that we do have one bucket of money and we do have one 8,400 student population group that we're trying to serve all of. And I just feel like I voted against AP Seminar when that came in for English last year. That seemed to surprise a lot of people. I didn't have the information. I didn't have the cost. I didn't have the trade-offs. I didn't understand what we were really trying to do. And I just, no matter what, I feel this process is a bit rushed, and I would like to understand it better. That's what I heard Erica and Lenny saying, and I don't hear anybody saying get rid of enrichment, get rid of classes. Just when I look at 8 classes on there, and I think about all the things we have to do, and we are starting to get feedback now from the strategic planning sessions, that just this should be done formulaically, not 18 months, but not, in my opinion, 1 or 2. I think there's a proper time frame and a proper set of steps we go through to validate whether this is an acceptable approach or not. And I realize there's time constraints and there's curriculum or terms or things like that come to people's heads. But right now, I would prefer to see more information than where we are.
All right. Unless there's an objection, I think we should go on to the action items. So can I get a motion to approve the issuance of general obligation school building and refunding bonds, Series 219B?
So moved.
Second.
Would it be inappropriate to tell you to keep this short?
No, it would not.
No, John, take whatever time you need. I
Good
think we
evening.
talked about this last month, though.
Yes, we did. Good evening, Chair Wallen-Friedman, Superintendent Schultz, and members of the board. This is a board-requested parameters resolution to establish a floor for the savings that we would like to realize when we refund bonds on October 24th. The resolution has a floor of 4.1%. The minimum that we have to have by state statute is 3%, so we're about 1% above that. And the revised presale report also shows estimated savings, which I know Ellers has a little bit of cushion in, of about 5.267%. So I would ask for the board's approval, take questions at this time.
I don't have any questions. This is what we asked you to bring to us.
Same.
All right.
I lent over the back and said, is this the one that we asked for last month?
Yes,
Right.
yes, it is.
It is.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the motion to approve the issuance of general obligation school building and refunding bonds, Series 219B, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
So Mira, the policy 606, is this going to be another 2-hour discussion?
Well, Lenny, it is a policy about the discussion of controversial issues. So, all right, I apologize for that. Now, this is a policy entitled Selection and now it's Review of Instructional Text Materials, Content or Issues with an eye towards questions of appropriateness or controversy. It is the policy we brought up a month ago, so I won't go into such detail, but I will say there was a concern a month ago about how much to review upon reception of a complaint and sort of the two types of complaints. And one is I don't mind what you're doing, but I'm opting my child out of it, or a student saying I want to opt out of it. And the other being, this seems inappropriate to me for the grade level, or the subject matter, or the relevance to an education. And I think you should review it with an eye towards whether it should be pulled away from everybody, not just my own child. And so the update here is there are two different, I guess, pathways or procedures, depending on which type of complaint it is, if it's an individual or if it's a concern for everybody. So it's formatted a little differently from last month. Credit to our team from the district who put that together, Sarah and John behind the scenes. So I think it flows better than it did before, and it meets that concern in a way that hopefully you guys approve of.
Yeah.
Open up to your
I think what we talked about last month was just that, a parent comes, it's for whatever reason, says my child is not going to read this book. So it didn't need to go through that review process. So the way I read this now is if there's that type of complaint, they will just be given another option. And I do like that you put in here with request with confidentiality. I think I really appreciate that. And then still having the procedure. And then I actually called Amir today just to ask about the change in the language on number 8 in Appendix 5. But it looks like the listing of race, color, and all of that is reflective of what we changed in 413. So that was just updated. Is that correct?
Yeah, the point she's mentioning is a sentence that starts with, the discussion will not reflect adversely upon persons because of, and then it lists a long list of categories, and it's modeled after the categories that are also listed in 413, which is a non-discrimination policy.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't in the version that we looked at a month ago. So I just wanted to verify that we're not excluding anybody, but in fact, we're just adhering closer to our 413, and that all protected classes are covered. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, all those in favor of approving the revised policy 606, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried.
Motion in a second?
I think we never had a motion? Oh, well, that's too bad. Let's go back and get a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Now we'll just do this one more time. All those in favor of approving policy 606, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Sarah. It's a good thing someone's listening. All right, are there any, I think we've had a bunch of committee updates here as we went through the evening. Any updates? Anything else to add?
Finances, refinancing bonds.
Oh, that's good. All right, we have completed the agenda. Is there any objection to adjourning? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.